Hi guys! Today we'll be recapping a story called Talented Baby Squirrel. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! At first, everything is confusing. A girl is being directed by her aunt to greet someone, reminding her to kneel before His Royal Highness. But the last thing Betty remembers is succumbing to the painful embrace of death. To her shock, the person who now stands before her is the younger version of the same person who stood before her as she bleeds to death, relishing her tragic end. He is Prince Ritter, the childhood friend who killed her. When she utters his name in shock, the prince is amused that she already knows his name. Her aunt, Viscountess Pyrena Cirrus, instantly yells at her for being rude to the prince. Only after hearing her aunt's screeching voice does she realize what day it is. It's the day she first met Ritter. Did she travel back in time? When she hears the prince say that it's okay that she's acting like that since they just met, anger is quick to rise within her. Ritter is a noble snake shifter, and she recalls all the times he gaslighted her by saying that he doesn't care that she is just an insignificant squirrel shifter because he still considers her his friend. What a two-faced guy! She used to believe all his saccharine words until he pierced her with his venomous fangs. He betrayed her right when she was about to reach her dream. Since she was a child, she has always been alone, and books were her only friend until she met him. Back then, she was bewildered when her aunt told her that she was chosen to marry the second prince of the empire. She was forced to listen to her aunt instruct her on how to practically be a slave to the prince, ordering her to behave herself and not to raise her voice. She felt like she was meeting a monster. But Ritter du Astrum is none of that. At least, not from the outside. He made her feel accepted even though the signum on her wrist, a piece of star that symbolizes her status as a shapeshifter, is black. He tells her that it's as pretty as the rest and that he is always on her side. Soon enough, he becomes her one and only friend. This is a testament to all of us. Never trust people easily. But despite being engaged to the prince, her aunt still controlled every aspect of her life. Pyrena did not want to spend a single penny on her niece, so Betty lived in utter poverty. Fortunately, she was able to find solace in reading and exploring the garden as a squirrel. One day, Ritter stumbles upon her reading a book about commerce. Betty naively shares with him her dream of becoming a merchant. She desires to leave the tiny place she is used to and explore the new world far away from all the torment. Strangely enough, Ritter's aura suddenly darkens when she talks about leaving. Still, he promises to support his friend's dream. Betty carefully planned her most awaited escape in order to live her life as a merchant. Ritter, her most trusted friend, promised to help her realize her dream. Swayed by his words and affection, Betty ends up sharing every aspect of her plan with him, from the money she has saved and even the guild she plans to apply to. Most importantly, she confides when she plans to leave, and it's during her coming-of-age ceremony. However, true to his shapeshifter form, the prince bit her neck with his fangs the day before her escape. He also steals the signum from her wrist. What's even more surprising, although no one is shocked really, is her aunt's involvement. It seems to her that the two of them have planned her death all along. Now, as she stands before the one who would end her life, all she can feel is an overwhelming rage. Without hesitation, she marches in front of him and slaps his face with all her might. She may be a tiny thing, but that slap sure looks like it hurt quite a bit. Take that, would-be backstabber! She even attacks him head-on, determined to pull out those sharp fangs with her bare hands. It takes a couple of guards to remove her from the prince. Betty is clever enough to know that she can't stay there, so she shapeshifts. With her squirrel form, she easily evades capture, fleeing away from her tormentors. She runs, and she does not look back. She eventually finds herself on top of a wagon heading north to the Duchy of Aslan. She thought that she'd be happy that she was leaving, but that was still the place that she had grew up in, the place where she met the person who she thought was her friend. Meanwhile, Pyrena is raging. She screams about how ungrateful Betty is. Ha! The audacity of this woman! The prince, on the other hand, is taken aback that Betty managed to forcefully knock out one of his loose baby teeth. Ritter then turns to the Viscountess Cirrus and comments that the encounter was unexpected. He then accuses her of wanting to side with his older brother instead based on how her niece is acting. The Viscountess is now kneeling before him, and she swears that her loyalty stands with him alone. She promises to sort everything out by telling the Duke that the girl has simply run away. Unknown to them, Betty will soon reach the gates of the Northern Duke's castle. The reason she made it all the way here is because she happens to hear about it in the carriage that she jumped onto. She was so determined to make Ritter pay for his betrayal. She then remembered how much Ritter hated his older brother, the first prince. Now that she had returned her 8-year-old self, she could now confide to the first prince about Ritter's weaknesses. Unfortunately, there was no way for her to meet the first prince because he was fighting in a faraway war. To make matters worse, she doesn't even have a place to stay in. That is when she heard the people in the carriage discussing how the Golden Lion Duke had defeated the Holy Imperial Army in the first battle. This victory is the beginning of the end of the Great War, but Beatty knew that there would be an unexpected event that caused the Golden Duke's army's retreat. She then realized that she could use her knowledge of the future to prevent this from happening. The Golden Lion Duke of the North, Leonhardt el de Aslan, is the father she never knew. A person she has never called father despite being his daughter. Not once did her father visit her, and despite writing countless letters, the only response she ever got was him sending back one of her letters in shreds. Even though she is the child he has abandoned, she'll make a proposition he can't refuse. She will ask him to let her stay in his castle until she becomes an adult. Now, however, her current dilemma is how to enter the castle in the first place. At that moment, the soldiers at the gate spot her in her adorable squirrel form. To her surprise, they are accommodating to her presence. They clearly recognize her as the daughter of their master. One of them even goes so far as to carry her inside on his palm like she's something precious. Even more strange is the fact that everyone seems to be so taken by her. The butler, Miss Joanna, eventually arrives at the scene, bewildered by her sudden presence. Beatty instantly thinks that the woman would kick her out for being filthy or for being a squirrel. But to her surprise, Joanna despairs that her once chubby cheeks are now hollow. The butler is quick to give her snacks to nibble on to her heart's content. She wonders why everyone is being nice to her, but she convinces herself not to be fooled by anyone. She knows that in this world, no one is nice for no reason, and so she tells Joanna that she must speak with the household head. Upon hearing that the young lady wants to make a deal, Joanna naively assumes that the child simply misses her father, but she has to explain that the Duke has gone far off. Rather than be put off, Beatty merely asks for whoever is in charge at the moment. But right then, a person slamming the door interrupted them. Carlitos el Aslan, the firstborn son of the Duke, enters the scene with blood smeared all over him. The boy greets her, addressing her as a runaway squirrel. My gosh, this boy is still a teen, but we can already tell that their genes are godlike. Joanna quickly tells the young lord off, saying that the lady is still young. They instantly wipe the blood off from all over the boy's face, so as not to scare the child. Although she's never met him in person, she has seen his portrait before. She knows that the boy is Carlitos el Aslan, the genius swordsman who has been on countless battlefields since he was 10. He is so merciless that more often than not, his hair is covered in blood, which is why he is also known as the Red Lion. Betty can't believe that this person is her brother. Based on his reaction, Betty assumes that he's not very happy that she is his sister. She visibly deflates due to the uncomfortable feeling. But to her surprise, Carlitos marches towards her, questioning why she smells like a snake. Betty looks back at the sheer intensity of Carlitos' eyes. That is when she notices the golden eyes that symbolizes the blood of Aslan. A simple gaze from a lion shifter can easily subdue people. However, instead of feeling oppressed, she feels an inexplicable warmth and coziness from that gaze. Carlitos suddenly comments that she doesn't seem to be afraid of him. Betty is startled when the boy lifts her up, so she tries to struggle. But to her surprise, he hugs her. When he lets go, he declares that she now smells like she should. Betty freezes in his arm, unused to being touched so familiarly. Carlitos is confused by her behavior, even more so when she scurries away from him, demanding her space back. Betty has never experienced such a thing before. She feels like her heart is about to burst. Joanna is worried for the young miss, especially since she starts trembling. The butler scolds the young master to be more careful with his little sister. Betty is becoming more convinced that her brother doesn't like her, especially when he merely addresses her as that thing. As far as he knows, she still doesn't have a name. Betty becomes even more upset, remembering how for a long time no one has even bothered to give her a name. But around the time that she was 10 years old, before she traveled back in time, she received the first and last letter from her father, and it contained her name. She shouts that she does have a name, and it's Betty. Carlitos is certainly taken aback by this. Even though she thinks that her father was proving how much he doesn't care about her, she still considered that name she was given as something precious. Suddenly, Joanna declares that she knows the meaning of that name, and it's a blessing. She compliments the young lady for her lovely name, asking her if she came up with the name herself. Betty is flustered, but she answers that it was given to her. When Carlitos suddenly calls her by her name, Betty can't help but be agitated because it feels so strange. But this instantly turns to annoyance when her brother insists on calling her Bushy Tail instead. It's because she's the size of his tail tuft as a lion. Betty is definitely upset by the playful nickname. They are so cute. They just met and they're now acting like siblings. Joanna has to interrupt their adorable banter. She tells Betty that since the Duke is not present, she can talk to the Lord handling all the house's affairs. The butler exits the room to call the Lord, but not before telling the children to get to know each other while she's gone. Betty is frightened that she has to spend alone time with her brother. As Joanna is walking down the hall, she is thinking about the North's custom of not naming a child until they know their temperament. This custom is even more evident when the child is showered with love, since finding the perfect name is quite difficult. But then again, not naming an 8-year-old is extreme. She just hopes that he would stop calling the young lady as his baby anymore. OMG, we are getting contradicting information here. But could it be that the Duke is actually a loving father all this time? Meanwhile, there is an awkward silence between the siblings. Carlitos is observing his little sister, noting how small and fluffy she is. He is even quite upset that he did not witness her in her squirrel form. So he approaches her once again, telling her to turn into a squirrel. He is being intimidating again, so Betty quickly assumes that he wants to harm her in her most vulnerable form. What is curious for the young lord is the fact that Betty is not running away from him. This is strange for him because he is so used to all cute things fearing him. Remembering small animals fleeing from his grasps upsets him, and this shows on his face. Betty assumes that she has upset him. She has never interacted with her brother before, so she thinks it's not fair to distance herself from him. It won't hurt to be on good terms with him, so she turns into a squirrel just like he asked. Carlitos can't take her adorableness. He even proclaims that they look alike because he has rounded ears in his animal form too. The young lord then hands her a seed to nibble on. Not wanting to be rude, Betty climbs on his palm and starts munching. Carlitos, on the other hand, is mesmerized by her cuteness. I can relate, dear Carlitos. She is simply too cute for her own good. While the young lord is busy admiring his sister, Joanna bursts in the room, urgently telling her that the Duke wants to speak with her. She can't believe that he wants to meet her right that instant. She is not yet ready to face him. Betty is shocked but goes along as the butler helps her dress. Soon they arrive at the office where the Duke usually handles his affairs. When they enter, Betty finally meets Count Zelot. He introduces himself, so Betty enthusiastically greets him back. The Count explains that the Duke has asked him to contact him using a communication device so he can speak to his daughter. When she asks the Count why her father wants to speak with her, the Count tells her that it's because the lady is acting like a baby. He explains that it's natural to want to visit family, but the North is at war. I am getting so much negative vibes from this guy. You better prove me wrong, Count. Betty is embarrassed that she is being called out for acting like a baby when she only wanted to prevent the initial retreat. Betty starts recalling all the hurtful words her aunt used to tell her, calling her useless and annoying. Fortunately, Carlitos is there to notice her discomfort. He places a hand on her shoulders and points out to the Count that he is becoming needlessly chatty. Soon enough, the device begins vibrating, indicating that the Duke is trying to contact them. Betty has to place her hand on the object, and suddenly, she can finally hear her father's voice. His first words is questioning why she came to the North. Betty has to stop for a moment to take in his voice for the first time. Somehow, it has the power to lure people in. Once again, the Duke speaks, asking her if something happened in the capital. That is when she realizes that something did happen. She slapped a prince! Betty doesn't know what to do. She knows that her father would consider her a disgrace for assaulting royalty. Once again, the Duke questions her if something happened. OMG, gorgeousness certainly runs in the family. This guy has no business being this handsome. Betty knows she can't lie about this since the Duke probably already knows that she slapped the prince, so she decides to tell him the truth. Her father and brother are shocked by this. She explained how her aunt arranged a marriage between her and the second prince. Betty is sure that her father would think that she's such a troublemaker, but that's not the case. Her brother even tells her that she did a good job since marriage is out of the question. Her father then voices how upset he is that her aunt would dare force a marriage he didn't approve of. The Duke assures her that he will send a rejection letter as soon as the war is over, so she should return to the capital for now. Betty is crestfallen upon hearing this. She understands that the North is currently considered a battlefield, but she has to fight to stay there. She unconsciously drops her tail, indicating how upset she is. Carlitos notices and touches the device to know what his father is saying to upset his sister. Carlitos asks her if she doesn't want to leave. When she tells him that she doesn't, he tries to convince their father to let her stay. But the Duke is not budging at all. Betty now knows that her father really hates that she's there. What surprised her is how her brother is taking her side. Carlitos explains that his sister needs to rest, otherwise she'll collapse on her way to the capital. This finally convinces the Duke, stating that she can stay there until he returns. Betty is ecstatic, and she thanks her brother for his help. Unexpectedly, her brother asks to touch her tail. She has to give in out of gratitude. As Carlitos admires her fluffy tail, news of the military on fire reaches them. All the provisions needed by the Duke's army are stocked there. Everyone is frantically trying to put out the fire. Betty realizes that this may be when the initial retreat began. The initial retreat is when the Duke's army, who has won every battle, suddenly retreated. The people who once admired the Golden Lion Duke ridiculed him for it. The reason for the retreat was never disclosed. It turns out that the reason behind it is because the food supply burned in a fire. The soldiers starved, and a great disaster is bound to hit the continent soon. Both the Duke's military and duchy population dwindled because of these events. Betty knows that she has to stop all of these things from happening, and she will do so by using a random plant. Carlitos manages to capture a suspected culprit, but he doubts his credibility since catching him was too easy. He knows that someone else is behind this sabotage. There's confusion as to what they should do next. Count Zilot then arrives, and he confesses to Carlitos that he should have taken more precaution as the one in charge of the Duke's affairs. The Count is telling him how sorry he is for not being able to prevent the fire. Drama much? This guy is becoming more and more suspicious. You can smell the gaslight from a mile away. Even Carlitos is bothered that even though he is apologizing, he seems too relaxed. That's when Betty decides to interrupt. She declares that she has a solution to their problem, showing them a root crop. Everyone is stunned because it's called the devil's fruit, known for being poisonous. Betty explains that the fruit is called tuberosum, and it doesn't deserve all those bad names. She tells them that it's a miracle plant. Once again, the meddlesome Count Zilot uses his gaslight powers to dissuade Betty, telling her to go play with a maid if she's bored. Rather than be disheartened, Betty explains the benefits of the plant, but the others still doubt her. To prove to them that the plant will not cause stomachache, she eats one of the fruits without hesitation. As expected, everyone panics and they instantly call for a physician. Continuing from the last chapter, everyone around Betty is worried she's going to show any signs of poisoning from ingesting the devil's fruit, tuberosum. The family doctor finally speaks his verdict. Betty is showing no signs of poisoning at all. Her brother Carl wants to be 110% sure, so he menacingly asks again, to which the doctor gets scared and explains further that the poison would have been seen in Betty's tongue. Carl, you really do care so much for your sister, huh? Betty then takes tuberosum in its entirety, from its stem down to its fruit. She proudly announces that it's edible. Carl believes her, but he can't make out what makes it non-poisonous. He hypothesizes that there could be certain groups of the plant that are non-edible and edible, to which Betty tells him it's wrong. A knight speaks up and thinks maybe it's because she's a squirrel shifter that she can digest anything, including poison. However, Betty rejects that thought as well. Betty finally shows them the answer. It's the stalk. Apparently, if ingested prior to the rest of the plant, one would have a neutralization from the poison. She had one prior to meeting with everyone, so by the time she ate the fruit, she already was neutralized from its poison. This fact is something that would be discovered a year or two from this moment, as our adorable female lead recalls from her past life. Ironically, this is found out when someone tries to unalive themselves by eating the entire plant. But of course, they don't end up dying. Undoubtedly, that person must feel like he's the unluckiest man alive. Despite Betty's explanation and even demonstration, the knights are still hesitant to try it themselves. Carl immediately takes a plant and ingests it as a whole. The knights are shocked as he eats it with no hesitation. Truly, Carl's trust for his baby sister is so wholesome. Seconds after the ingestion, nothing happens. Carl is totally fine. The knights are moved by his sacrifice. Some are still hesitant as both of those who tested the plant are shifters. But there are some who try it right away. Everyone eats the fruit and finds themselves well, not to mention filled as well. Betty proudly announces that this is how they'll resolve the food supply issue since there's an abundance of tuberosums around them. They all discuss how they'll deliver it right away, as Betty gets to write a letter about how to ingest the plant so that it may fill the knights at war stomachs, avoiding the fate of retreat. Our brilliant female lead is happy that things are going well for her. Using this chance, she will make an appeal to her father and ask him that she'll be allowed to stay here until her coming-of-age ceremony. On the other hand, Count Zilot doesn't want the problem to be resolved this fast. He's anxiously thinking of what to report to her. Ha! I knew he was up to no good! He already emitted suspicious energy right from the start! I wonder who this her he's referring to. Just as the knights at war are about to faint from hunger, the food supply finally arrives. Head Leonhardt, Betty and Carl's father, takes Betty's letter and reads it right away. She claims that the food supply is edible and can help as they have an ongoing war. At first, he thought it was a mistake, seeing as the supplies were all the tuberosums, but the knight reads another letter that explains how it's eaten. Of course, the knights are doubtful as she's only 8 years old. Since this is all his beloved daughter's idea, Leonhardt eats the entire plant with zero hesitation, which leads to the rest of the knights admiring him for doing such a sacrificial feat. This is exactly the same panel as when Carl did it too. Because of this, everyone is recharged and ready to continue their war. Back at his own tent, Leonhardt lovingly reads his daughter's letter. With the way he acts, there's definitely a reason behind as to why he supposedly abandoned her. Back in the castle prior to the delivery of the food rations is where Betty currently is, writing her letter for her father. Because of her experience in her past life, she's able to compose a letter that even Joanna thought was cute of her to add expressions that make her sound mature. Betty is happy that she's being helpful towards many people and decides to help out more by picking up tuberosome plants. Carl appears and tells her not to, as she's had a long day and deserves to sleep. Joanna then mentions having Betty's room ready. Betty is surprised to hear this. She actually has a room prepared for her? For the sweet little baby? Of course there is! Betty thinks everyone is being strange, as she's not attuned to such kindness, especially in her past life. Her older brother offers to show her to her room, which turns out to be a long corridor? Betty knew she wasn't welcomed. Is this their way of telling her that she doesn't belong here? However, much to her surprise, and quite fortunately, this isn't the case. Carl grabs her hand and leads to different doors, each one leading to different kinds of rooms too. Betty even has her own playroom. She still doesn't believe this is all hers, but Carl is consistent in reassuring that all of this is. Aw, best brother ever! Carl picks her up to her room and shows her the beautiful horizon by her room's huge windows. Now Betty is glad that she has been courageous. If it weren't for her impulsiveness to leave the capital, she wouldn't experience this kindness and beauty of her environment. Carl places his little sister to bed. The sun is still up and she can't sleep at all. He figures that she won't be able to sleep anytime soon, so he pulls out a running wheel. Since she's a squirrel, he thought she'd like the idea. He looks around and decides on something else. A squirrel mansion! Betty is just speechless while Carl is excited about it. Well, apparently, it seems that Carl is having more fun than her. Joanna comes in and sees the siblings in the middle of dress-up, with Betty transformed into her squirrel self. Joanna is delighted to see them get along with each other, while little Betty thinks her brother is just messing with her. She couldn't say no to him just as he begged her with teary eyes. Later on, Betty is in her kitty nightgown, to which she comments that the Aslan family is probably really generous towards guests. When she gets back to her room, she is greeted by Carl, who had been waiting for her. He wants to tuck her in for the night. He plops her down on the bed and then makes her comfortable before telling her goodnight. He even calls her by her name this time instead of the usual bushy tail. Betty feels warm, as she has never been tucked into sleep before. Oh, Betty, you precious baby, you deserve all the love in the world. Meanwhile, at the other part of the mansion, Count Zelot is vehemently frustrated that his plan was ruined all because of a teeny squirrel. The magic ball zaps as someone is trying to contact him. It's the second queen from Astrum Kingdom. She looks like Ritter, especially with that sinister look. She's been trying to contact Zelot, yet to no avail. She has no choice but to command Betty's aunt, Viscountess Ciuris, to take matters into her own hands. And she better not fail this time. Oh no, this sounds like bad news for our little Betty. It's another great day for Betty. The maids wake her up and immediately have her dressed. The only problem is, she has to wear at least 7 dresses. The maids are having fun playing dress up, and Betty is cute in anything that she wears. Seeing as how cute their little master is, it's definitely no surprise. However, poor little Betty doesn't appreciate being called cute, as she associates the word with how the butlers and maids in the capital would use it when complimenting money and jewelry. In other words, for her, it's a word used when something of value came into someone's hands. She panics at the thought of eventually realizing that she has become someone's possession. Oh, my sweet child, I hope you heal from your traumas. Being the strong girl she is now, she announces that she belongs to herself. The maids look at each other confused before agreeing to her. They thought that Betty has a boy telling her that she belongs to him, so they praise her for being courageous, which in turn confuses Betty even further. Finally, after so many dresses, they finally are able to pick one for today. Just as Betty is being escorted to the dining room, a maid approaches her and thanks her for her help regarding the food source problem in the battlefield. Apparently, her boyfriend is a soldier and is part of the war alongside Leonhardt. Betty feels happy that she was able to help people this way. She hopes deep inside that this sort of warmth won't suddenly disappear like a bunch of clouds. Afterwards, who meets her in the dining room is none other than her older brother. Betty wants to get on his good side, and by doing so, she avoids eating with him, as this is because of her past. Her aunt kept telling her that she made her lose her appetite, so she believed that as a fact. That's why when Carl tells her to sit with him, she doesn't believe what she's hearing. She joyfully joins him as they eat their meal together. Betty wanders around the corridor, wondering why everyone is being nice to her. She reaches a conclusion that they probably just don't know that the head of his house, her father, hates her. She then believes that once Leonhardt comes back, everyone will hate her just as they used to in her past life. My heart aches for her in this scene. The least she can do right now is give back to everyone in her own little way. In that regard, Betty suddenly has an idea. She plans to gather berries, a specialty of hers even from her past life, and give them to everyone. She gives a pile of it to Carl, who has been supportive and kind to her since day one. He's touched and promises to give her something in return, something that she will like. As Betty went for more berries outside, she touched a tree. She feels a huge energy emitting from it. It's as if it's calling her. Before she could wander mindlessly, a maid thankfully stops her, bringing Betty back to reality. Just as things couldn't get any more wrong, a magical beast in the form of a white squirrel leaps on Betty and teleports her somewhere else. Everyone around her panics until Carl arrives too. Carl is furious to know that a magical beast has taken his little sister to who knows where. Before Carl arrives, he has also been looking for a gift to give to Betty. He thinks that she'll love having a snow fox fur. He promises not to have blood on him the next time she sees him, as Joanna advises. Upon going back after his successful kill, everyone informs him that Betty is kidnapped by the snowstorm squirrel. Carl furiously commands everyone to look for her everywhere. He can't risk losing his beloved sister like this. Big brother responsibilities! Will we see Carl's lion form? Somewhere else in the northern mountains, Betty is safe and sound, all in one piece. She hears a gentle voice, and it's coming from the snowstorm squirrel. The squirrel floats as it communicates with Betty through her head. It calls her Crumbs. It explains to her that she is its star crumb. Betty understands that she may be her ancestor. It's then revealed that it was the one who turned back Betty's time to save her. Before it can explain the most important thing to Betty, its spirit comes out of the snowstorm squirrel's vessel. Betty is left with the squirrel. She now realizes that she's in the middle of nowhere. She hears some rustling leaves and immediately gets scared, since northern mountains are known for their large beasts. A voice calls out to her, a familiar voice. A boy, his eyes covered with his hair, in a black and gold cloak, emerges from the trees. Who's this new and mysterious character? Betty assesses the stranger in the cloak. His height is like that of her brother's, and his voice too. She assumes that he's around his age. She asks him questions and realizes that this stranger is actually wary of her. Our kind-hearted female lead assures him that she's just as lost as he is. This seems to work as the aura between them lights up. He chuckles at her. Who wouldn't, though? She's being cute as heck. Just as she's about to start walking back home, heavy rain suddenly falls on them. The strange boy has her stand beside him under the protection of the tree's shade. The snowstorm squirrel gets out from Betty's bag, which turns the strange boy into defensive mode. Why is everyone getting hyped up by a cute animal? Betty stops him and begs him for its life, so he gives in, but promises that if it shows the slightest bit of aggression, he'll have to get rid of it. Betty lets out a sneeze, as it's starting to get cold after all. The boy looks at her in concern and asks her to come with him. He calls her a pretty lady and has her hide under his cloak so that she wouldn't get wet. All this makes Betty get flustered, but she follows him nonetheless to an empty cabin. They get inside the cabin, where they're warm and sheltered. This boy is drenched because of her, and so she starts to feel bad, so she has him take off the cloak. She promises not to look at him, seeing that he seems rather hesitant to take everything off. He finally takes his wet cloak off and assures her that it's fine to look now. To her surprise, the one thing that gets her attention is the fact that there's a blindfold over his eyes. The cabin where Betty and the mystery boy are in is not warm enough, so they need to start a fire. The boy finds a pile of wood. Betty wonders how he's able to see with that blindfold. But as she accidentally stares too long, she notices that he's still good-looking even with the blindfold on. Doing a bit of sightseeing, are we, Betty? He asks her to sit close to the fire so they can get warm. She doesn't budge, so he offers his arms, asking her if she wants to be carried over. This makes Betty blush. To her credit, how could he say that so calmly? As they both sit down by the fire, she figures out what the books call people like him: a Casanova. For those who are wondering what that is, it essentially means a lover boy. Upon this realization, she groans as he really is the perfect example of one. She tries her best not to be suspicious, as she thinks he might take something away from her. Betty learned to be wary of these types of men. Out of nowhere, her stomach growls. She instantly regrets not taking her brother's offer of the turkey. Luckily, the boy has some bread he can share. She breaks the bread in half to give to him, but he insists that she take it all. Such a gentleman. Later on, his stomach growls too. Betty feels bad because she already has eaten everything, but she has an idea. She goes out in the cold and takes tuberosum plants. The boy suddenly has thoughts that Betty also wants him dead. There are others who do? And so he confronts her right away. The boy asks Betty if she wants to kill him too. Betty is just confused. Why on earth would she kill him when they just met? Is it possible that this boy also has some troubled past? He can't help but feel that everyone is out to get him because many have indeed tried to. Maybe that's why he has to cover his eyes. Fortunately, Betty realizes that the boy's heightened wariness was because of the devil's fruit she was going to offer. She then explains how to ingest the fruit without being poisoned, and makes her own cooking show with it. She actually makes grilled tuberosums. She takes out a stalk and tells him to take one first before eating the fruit. This has the boy bite off the stalk from her hand, a gesture that certainly startles the little lady. Whoa, now that's a bit weird. Anyway, now that he's full, Betty decides to look around the cabin. She goofily runs around looking at things. The boy just thinks to himself that she has not changed at all. Wait, they actually met before and Betty just didn't remember? What a plot twist! He remembers her goofiness and her small size, and most of all, her curiosity-filled eyes that are dark as the night sky. These might be eyes that he has already fallen for based on how he remembers her. He has a memory of her while being in rugged clothes back in the capital. Meanwhile, it finally stops raining. Betty is the first one to notice. She flings the door wide open and hears people looking for her. She then tells the boy that they can go together if he's heading the same direction. But he just places his hand on her head, telling her what might be the sweetest goodbye. When she looks behind him, he's already long gone, with no trace of his presence at all. I hope they meet again soon. All the while, Carl runs up to his little sister asking if she got hurt. Just by the tree, the boy from earlier is still here and eavesdropping, even catching Betty's name. He finally shows a part of his eyes, and they were golden yellow, a sign that he's also a shifter. He claims to feel hurt that he never knew her name, but it's not like he told his. He had also assumed that she was a maid and not a noble lady. Considering that they met in the capital where she was abused and neglected, it isn't surprising that that was his impression of her. The boy scans Betty's brother, Carl. All of a sudden, Carl's eyes almost meet his. Good thing he also has good reflexes, or else he would have been found out. He finally goes on to wherever he's supposed to go, but he also tells himself to dig some information about House Aslan. Anyway, back to Betty and Carl. The latter threatens to kill the magical beast that's with her. Like earlier, Betty begs him not to. Before she can explain her reason, her vision starts to get blurry. She starts wobbling until she gives in and collapses in front of him. In Betty's room, Carl threatens the doctor because Betty is still not waking up and looks sick. While trying to stay calm and not scared, the doctor explains to Carl that Betty's body is different from Carl's, which is why she is sick because of the rain. While Carl is still processing the information, the doctor announces he will get more medicine for Betty to drink. Looking at the sleeping Betty, Carl promises to himself that he will protect her in the future. The next day, the maids are still worried since Betty still has a cold. Hearing Betty sneeze, they hurriedly cover Betty with a thick blanket and ask her if she wants hot cocoa. While Betty looks at the maids, the doctor weirdly informs Betty that she looks better than yesterday, but still tells her that she must rest until she fully recovers. After the doctor left, the maids reminded Betty to rest in bed again. Hearing this, Betty realizes that she has only recently been allowed to go out freely, since she was only allowed to stay in the house before, thus lying down is simple for her to follow. While on the bed, Betty overhears the maids talking about the Duke and his bodyguard arriving. Betty jumps out of bed and excitedly asks the maids if her father is coming home. No, she is so innocently cute! One maid, with a hint of concern, then reminds Betty to be careful since she's still sick, but the other maids tell her that Betty is happy because the Duke is returning. The maid then approaches Betty and tells her that the tuberosum that she instructed to deliver helped a lot for both the guards and the Duke, thus making them return home earlier than expected. Next, the people outside the castle are warmly welcoming and celebrating the return of the Duke and the guards. While the guards are walking towards the castle, they're talking about Beatty being a genius at a young age and their desire to meet her. Meanwhile, Beatty is busy preparing herself to meet the Duke. While the maids are fixing her dress, they tell Beatty that it's okay to meet the Duke in her pajamas since Beatty is still sick. But Beatty replies that her image needs to be perfect since first impressions are essential. Beatty hurriedly runs towards the castle entrance after hearing that the Duke has arrived. But Beatty stops at the bottom of the stairs after seeing the Duke for the first time and is nervous as she looks into the Duke's eyes. Staring at Beatty, the Duke asks the servants why Beatty is at the castle's entrance. Hearing this, Beatty then realizes that the Duke may not like her. She might have forgotten about it for a moment because everyone in the castle treats Beatty warmly. On the other hand, the Duke reminds himself to stay calm and not hug Beatty directly. When the Duke is about to pat Betty's head, she flinches and remembers her memories of her aunt hurting her. Carl then calls the Duke's attention by welcoming him. The Duke praises Carl for how smoothly the plan is carried out, but Carl informs the Duke that it was all Betty's idea, and that Beatty took care of everything. Betty then formally tells the Duke that she wants to offer him a deal he won't regret accepting. While curious about why Betty is formally talking to him, the Duke tells the child that they will talk tomorrow. He then instructs the maid to bring Betty to her room and make her rest till she's stable. Betty then excitedly returns to her room and tells the maid that she will prepare for tomorrow's meeting with the Duke. Night falls. When the butler reports to the Duke, the maid arrives at the office and informs the Duke that Betty no longer has the flu. Hearing this, the Duke is relieved and realizes that Betty was small and weak before. However, Betty is growing up quickly, even running to greet him. Remembering Betty's scared reaction, the Duke asks his butler and the maid if his appearance is scary, to which the butler directly replies that the Duke does indeed give off that vibe, that the adults and kids fear him, and that even a glimpse of the Duke can make others shudder in fear. And so, the Duke decides to prepare something for Betty during their meeting. The next day, Betty is welcomed by many delicious pastries during her meeting with the Duke. Betty tries to stop herself from eating the pastries but fails. Meanwhile, the Duke is happy that Betty is eating his prepared pastries. Betty stops eating after noticing that the Duke is looking at her, thus she starts to report to him her plan. Betty informs the Duke that the northern mountain is their best defense, but its agriculture is terrible. Thus, they will get most of the food from the outside, which will be Aslan's first barrier. Betty then thinks that she'll use her plan for the Duke to make her stay in the castle. This poor baby is still traumatized because of her aunt. The Duke then tells Betty that she doesn't need to worry about the incoming winter because he already has plans with the kingdom of Sadis, which is known for its wheat plains. For this fall, there will be a lot of cereal. He mentions that if the problem is about the territory, then they will bring it somewhere else. In the north, there's a harsh winter every year, which is what Aslan is known for. Every year there are many invasions, but invaders back out as soon as they see the lion flag. Betty again explains to the Duke that the citizens can't underestimate the drought since people don't usually travel to the north, and people are desperate due to their plants being severely damaged. Thus, even if the Duke opens a warehouse in another kingdom, it might still be an empty one. Next, Betty shows the Duke a flower pot and hands it over to him. While looking at the tubersome, the Duke remembers that these wildflowers are seen on the road, but he still finds them beautiful since Betty gave them to him. Betty then explained that tuberosum reproduces faster than any plant, thus solving the distribution problem and helping significantly during the drought. Sharing his opinion on the discussion, the butler tells Betty that even if it can be used as food during drought season, it still doesn't taste good. After hearing what the butler tells Betty, she tells him she also solved that problem. Betty then proceeds to show them the different ways she cooks the tuberosum. Betty introduced them to the following dishes: tuberosum soup, tuberosum cheese, tuberosum salad, steamed tuberosum, and various other tuberosum recipes. Betty tells the Duke that eating it is safe and tasty since she tastes it. The Duke then panics after hearing that Betty ate her experiment recipes and quickly instructs the butler to call the doctor. After checking on Betty, the doctor announced that Betty was fine. The Duke then tells Betty that she must care for her health since she is fragile, unlike him and Carl. Betty reminds herself not to overthink how caring the Duke treated her. Next, the Duke asks what Betty wants in return for the plans that she suggests. Betty then innocently tells the Duke that she wants to stay in the castle until she's grown up. In all honesty, the Duke must fix his communication skills so that Betty will not overthink everything. The Duke is stunned after realizing that all Betty wishes for is to stay at the castle and not return to the capital. The Duke then seriously declines Betty's wish. Hearing this, Betty quickly tells the Duke she has other plans and then asks for another chance. Betty also adds that she will pay the Duke while she is staying in the castle. The Duke again then tells her that she doesn't need to spend money when she's at home and instructs her to return to her room and rest. Betty is mourning for a failed deal with the Duke, thus the maids ask her if she wants warm milk to make her feel better. Carl then arrives at Betty's room. Seeing Betty's miserable face, Carl pats Betty's head while asking her if she is bullied, even asking who the names are and offering to take care of them. Betty looks at her brother lovingly and tells him she's fine now. While lying in the bed, Betty realizes that the maids and Carl care for her so much, despite the fact that in the first place, all she wanted was a safe place to stay. But then after staying for a short period, Betty realizes that she wants to stay because of the people in the castle. Meanwhile, the Duke holds a meeting about Betty's stay at the castle. The Duke suddenly remembers the helplessness he felt the first time Betty was sick, since he could not do anything for her because Betty's body was weak and she couldn't withstand the North's coldness. The Duke informs him that he wants to send Betty back to the capital since the weather there is fine, but the Duke doesn't want Betty to be lonely. Thus, he is torn with the situation. The Duke then worries that Betty will again leave the capital if she gets homesick. The royal subject reminds him that it is best for Betty's health to stay in the capital. Still, the butler unconsciously tells the Duke that he noticed that Betty now looks strong, and that the butler has a niece the same age as Betty who went on a hunger strike just so she could get what she wants, thus making the Duke worry because he can't imagine Betty starving. The butler then tells the Duke that someone from the capital must take responsibility for not protecting Betty, to which the Duke agrees and instructs them to enhance the security to prevent further incidents from happening. Next, alone in the Duke's office, the butler informs the Duke that the investigation is starting regarding how the people in the capital treat Betty. The next day, Betty is surprised that her room is full of Adonis flowers and a giant toy squirrel with a gold acorn. The maid then informs Betty that it is a present from the Duke. Hearing this, Betty is shocked and thinks that maybe the Duke finally sees the value of her recipes. Next, Betty visits the Duke to give the letter she wrote. While opening the letter, the Duke thinks that Betty must like the present since she wrote a thank you letter to him. The Duke even makes a mental note that he will frame the letter Betty wrote. However, all the Duke's expectations of the letter fall down the drain after finding out that the letter is all about Betty's recipes. Betty then informs the Duke that she received the Duke's present, and then again tries to make a deal with him to make her stay at the castle until she's grown up. But the Duke flatly declines her again, thus making Betty bargain for at least just a year more at the castle, which is also rejected by the Duke. Looking at how sad Betty is, the Duke tells her that he can build a smaller castle in the capital. But Betty replies to her father that it is not about the castle. Betty again tells the Duke that she can also help in battles in other ways and will not be a burden to him. The Duke then pats the head of Betty, who he finds so adorable, but still declines Betty's deal to make her stay at the castle. Betty then notices getting a warm feeling after the Duke's action. In the following days, every morning, Betty is always welcomed with so many presents from the Duke, although she misunderstands this as the Duke trying to tell her that she needs to leave the castle. Next, the Duke is surprised to see Betty pulling a cart full of her presents. Betty then informs the Duke that she would like to return the gift and doesn't need it since she only wants to stay in the castle. The Duke realizes that his daughter is not mature for such a young age. Betty again asks for the Duke to make her stay in the castle, but this time she calls the Duke father. The Duke is then swayed and agrees to Betty that she can remain until winter comes. Finally, getting her wish, Betty feels excited and happy, so much so that her tail has grown out. In the capital, a parade is held to celebrate the victory of the Emperor, Nader Dexus Astrum, the ruler of the Kingdom of Astrum. As Nader is waving to the people, he overhears them talking about how cool Duke Aslan is, and that the victory is because of him. Hearing about the people's statements, Nader feels angry, but his wife tells him that they don't know anything, while also informing him that she already has a plan for everything. Nader's wife then faces the child Ritter and reminds him to do his best. Really, using a child to use your evil deed is too much. At night, in the office of Count Zelot, a man pays a visit to him, although the Count seems invested in him not doing so. The man then informs Zelot that he came in secret and that there is no evidence during the fire at the military house since his daughter died after doing the plan. Zelot then asks the man what he needs. The man greedily tells him that he wants more money in return for keeping the secret. Zelot tells the man that he understands and tells the man to approach him. When the man is near Zelot, the Count stabs the man with a knife. Zelot's butler then enters his office, and so the Count instructs him to clean up the mess. Zelot's butler agrees and also informs him that somebody from the capital wants to meet him. The following day, while Betty is thinking of a plan to stay in the castle for the next 10 years, she suddenly turns into a squirrel, thus making her decide to go somewhere else to think. On top of the tree, she sees the Duke talking to his butler about the meaning of Betty's name and how it was made. After learning that the Duke made an effort and was meticulous in naming her, she realized that maybe the Duke didn't hate her that much. Of course not! The Duke loves you so much and he worries about your health. The following day, Betty is in the kitchen, busy making cookies out of tubersum. While making the cookies, she cannot help but think about how the Duke put so many thoughts into naming her. But she easily brushes it off and reminds herself to focus on making the cookies. Betty wants to use the tubersum cookies to increase the value of the contract of her stay in the castle. After baking the cookies, Betty then prepares a drink for the Duke. While walking toward the office of the Duke to deliver the cookies and the drink Betty made, she suddenly sees someone in the hallway. After realizing it is her aunt, Betty freezes and drops the tray on the floor. Betty's aunt then asks how she is. All the while, Betty is shaking with terror. Betty's aunt then tells her that she is still clumsy, just like before, and also, without a shred of truth, tells Betty that she's concerned about her niece, while hardly pinching Betty's cheeks. Betty remembers how her aunt pretends to care for her, but then scolds and hits her when her aunt feels like it. But Betty then realizes after staying in the castle that she needs to defend herself. Thus, Betty shoves the hand of her aunt away. In response, Betty's aunt scolds and shouts at her, saying that she's disrespecting her. But Betty bravely replies, loudly telling her aunt she's hurting her. Betty's aunt then hears the maid commenting that Betty's cheeks are red, thus making her act up. The Duke arrives shortly after at the scene and asks what's going on, which makes Betty's aunt, Parina, try to get the Duke's attention by greeting him. The Duke, full of concern, just walks past her and approaches Betty, asking her if it's too heavy, thus making her drop the tray. Betty innocently tells the Duke that she cooked it for him. Hearing this, the Duke then unconsciously reaches for the scattered cookies, but is stopped by the maids. Parina comments on how slow the servants in the castles are, and that the Duke may send them to the capital for her to train. The Duke annoyingly tells Betty's aunt to stop, while stopping his anger since he doesn't want Betty to see him angry. The Duke then tells Betty to return to her room and instructs Parina to get inside the Duke's office. While there, Betty's aunt stares at the Duke's handsome face, unconsciously fixing her hair. Next, the Duke asks Parina to explain to Betty why she did all those things. Betty's aunt tries to deny it, but the Duke becomes angry and slams the table using his fist while shouting and asking Parina why she hurt Betty when in fact, she is tasked to take care of his daughter. Parina still tries to deny that she's hurting Betty at the capital and blames Betty for running away. She then adds that she always sends letters and reports about Betty's state. The Duke then asks Parina why he has not been informed of Betty's talent. Parina curiously thinks that Betty is not talented since after her sister died, Parina got rid of all the books because she's afraid to argue pointlessly with Betty. The Duke also tells Parina that she has no right to arrange a marriage for Betty without asking for his opinion. Parina starts to realize that she does not have any more excuses. She pretends to faint and says that she misses her sister so much. The Duke does not buy her excuse and informs Parina that he has had enough of her and that even if his wife asked him to take care of her sister, it's no longer on the table after Parina hurt Betty. Afterwards, he instructs Parina to clean her own guest room. Next, in Parina's room, she eagerly sits on her couch and shouts that she doesn't even want to take care of Betty in the first place, and that she's doing it because of the plan. Parina then looks at the potion and thinks to herself that the Duke, the most handsome and powerful husband in the kingdom, will be hers soon. All she needs is to make him drink the potion. While Betty is preparing to go out the following day, a maid hands her a letter from the Duke. Betty is so excited even for a simple letter since in the past, she had not received any letters from the Duke, even if she had sent a lot to him. Betty then carefully placed the letter together with the other letters inside the gold acorn. The mood changes, however, when Parina enters Betty's room. Parina mockingly praises Betty, commenting on how cute she is, and asks if she can take a look at what Betty is holding. Parina barged into the room and demanded Betty to hand her the letters the Duke wrote. Betty hid her valuable letters, for she knew whatever reason Parina had to see the letters, it wasn't good. Thankfully, her aunt got distracted by the fur coat and wanted to try it for herself. She thought it looked better on her. The servant reminded her that it was a gift from the Duke to Betty. Parina shoved the coat to the servant and scolded her for making it sound like she was stealing it. She then ordered the servants to leave the room because she had a talk with Betty. Seeing how Parina treated the servants made Betty feel sorry for them. They were nice people who were treated badly because of her. Betty stood to protect the servants and reminded Parina to maintain her class as a visitor of House Aslan. Oof, imagine a child reminding you of your place. After sending off the servants, Betty confronted her aunt about what she wanted to talk about. Purina thought Betty gave herself a name. She explained that the North has a unique tradition. They put great importance on names, so they don't just give names to children that are bad, just like Betty. Children who were given names that didn't fit them were bound to have a life full of hardships. Purina was under the impression that Betty made up her name because she didn't have any until she was 8. She revealed that she had asked the Duke to give Betty a name right when she was born, but he refused, and concluded that the Duke must dislike Betty a lot. Betty realized what her aunt was saying was totally different from what she heard, that her father had pondered for over 8 years just to choose a fitting name for her. Purina was lying and manipulating her to think badly about her father. All those years, her aunt made her believe the Duke didn't love her, just like now. Betty wondered what else Purina lied to her about. Now that her father granted her to stay for 1 month, she needed to find ways to extend her stay by slowly drawing out her secret cards. Betty worked all night to draft a plan for an incoming disaster that would strike the kingdom that couldn't be prevented. The next day, the Duke received the detailed plan that his baby made and immediately called for a meeting with Betty and all the vassals. During the meeting, Betty confirmed that everything she had written was true and inevitable. These were things that her own eyes saw before she went back in time. It couldn't be prevented, but they could do something to prepare for it. Betty explained that the incoming disaster was not the first, but had happened repeatedly over the years, all seemingly predicted by an old poem. The poem says, "The bluebird of the night that flies high, the blue breath that has been long forgotten. The earth ran dry as the skies froze, and the plants grew tall, all withered. The long cold fluttering of the wings, their breath shall be taken away with the wages of oblivion." Count Zealot tried to question the credibility of Betty's information, but each time, Betty revealed more information that proved her prediction. The accounts revealed that every time the bluebird, a metaphor for the blue star, appeared, a little ice age would occur and a huge famine would break out roughly every 200 years, and the incoming winter would be the start of another famine. Betty then proposed to solve the biggest problem, which was food security, and it was of course using tubersums. The duchy had been importing food from other territories, but if they grew tubersums, which naturally survives in the cold temperature of the north, they would be able to secure sufficient food for the famine. Next, Betty proposed a free food kitchen, a policy that had been turned down several times due to its high risk during Betty's previous life. Of course, Count Zealot questioned again the effectiveness of the plan when Betty proposed giving free food to the commoners through the free food kitchen. Gosh, I hate him! He believed that giving free food to the commoners only made them lazy. But Betty defended that they wouldn't be giving out food for nothing. She explained that she had been promoting the benefits of tubersums and their recipes throughout the duchy. The problem with the tubersums was that only a small number of people appreciated the benefits because they believed they were poisonous. And despite the success of the military food rescue because of tubersums, this information traveled too slowly since the duchy was so vast. They must make great use of the plant to deal with the famine, but it was not easy to popularize them as a food source. And to solve this, the free food kitchen could be used. Betty continued explaining her plan. The solution to the crux lay in the mouth of the people. She explained that the free food kitchen would allow the people to taste the food, and this would change their perception about tubersums. Rather than just posting information about the plant and waiting for people to read it, they could just have them taste it themselves and spread the word about tubersums much faster. Seeing that the vassals seemed persuaded by Betty's plan, Count Zealot immediately objected to it because there was no profitability in giving out free food. But Betty responded that the people would be paying them in return for the free food. Zealot noted that the people would be upset if the free food kitchen asked for payment, which was supposedly free. He failed to understand that what Betty meant was that they would be getting in return was information. Through the free food kitchen, they could gather information about the duchy from those visiting the food kitchen. And when needed, they could also use the visitors to spread information. Betty concluded that intangible information was a powerful weapon that they couldn't put a price on. Everyone, except Zealot, praised Betty for coming up with this genius plan and jokingly suggested creating a commemorative statue for her. To her surprise, even the Duke agreed to build a huge statue for his baby. However, Betty was not yet done. There was still the matter of the budget, which was Betty's biggest concern. Betty had also prepared a plan for this. However, the Duke informed them that since they no longer had expenses for military supplies, their finances were in a good state. Betty decided to keep her plan since she didn't need to use it yet. After the meeting, Betty decided to stroll and wished out loud that her proposal guaranteed her an extension to stay in the north. While walking on the snow, Carlita suddenly called her out and grabbed her onto his horse. In a comical twist, Betty partially transformed into a squirrel, which Carlitos misinterpreted as a sign that she enjoyed the ride and sped up the steed even faster. Betty was, in fact, dying in fear. When they arrived at their destination, Betty's fatigue from the day's work and stressful ride seemingly faded when she saw a beautiful lake. Carlitos had brought her to Aslan Lake. Betty didn't know such a place existed in the north until now. Carlitos felt proud that he had brought his sister to the place mounted on a horse. While Betty agreed that the place was nice, she vowed never to ride a horse again. Not because she didn't like it, but because she didn't know how to ride one. This information shocked Carlitos. Of course, how could an 8-year-old not know how to ride a horse, right? It even worried Carlitos more that Betty didn't know how to hunt. Betty proudly mentioned that she was good at picking berries and climbing trees. Carlitos thought that, although cute, it was useless. Carlitos rummaged through his bag and gave Betty a children's bow set. Seeing how excited his brother was, Betty decided to learn the bow. While Carlitos passionately demonstrated how to hold the weapon properly, her demeanor changed when she saw a giant white snake lurking behind Carlitos. Betty shouted to warn her brother. As the snake moved to attack, Betty remembered how Ritter betrayed her in her past life. But with a single swing of his sword, Carlitos sliced the serpent in half. Betty, though trembling in fear, made sure her brother wasn't bitten by the snake. Seeing how scared and worried Betty was, Carlitos assured her there was no need to be afraid. He promised to protect Betty from anything that threatens her and chop it with his sword. After disposing of the dead snake, Carlitos suggested Betty get some sleep. Betty initially protested because they just saw a huge snake and now they were going to sleep in that very place. However, Carlitos reminded her of his promise. After setting up a hammock, Carlitos tucked in Betty, and almost immediately she felt her drowsiness pulling her in. Right before she fell asleep, she thanked Carlitos after realizing he had come all the way there just for her. "Aw, Carlitos, you sweet little lion." Carlitos recalls his childhood. There spread a ridiculous rumor that, like lions, House Aslan pushed their cubs off cliffs, and only those who survived the fall were taken in. Of course, this wasn't true. Instead, children of House Aslan were sent off to the battlefield and carried real blood-stained swords. It may be harsh for some, but for Carlitos, it wasn't so bad to live that sort of life. Enemies and servants alike were filled with fear when they saw him. That was until his small, bushy-tailed squirreled sister arrived. Betty woke up feeling refreshed yet hungry. Carlitos fed her the last piece of special high-calorie chocolate suitable for shapeshifters like them who get hungry often. Betty felt bad eating the chocolate, knowing that her brother was also hungry. Luckily, she saw berries and nuts nearby, so she transformed into a squirrel and picked them for Carlitos. Carlitos, so touched by Betty's gesture, jokingly noted that he would hand them down for generations as heirlooms of House Aslan. Carlitos never thought there'd come a point when he would be worried about someone else's feelings, like how he cared for Betty. Even when he saw tons of his enemies dying painfully on the battlefield, he didn't give much thought to it. He realized that those feelings weren't just because Betty was cute, but because she was so lovable. That day, Betty didn't realize that someone cared so much for her that they'd kill anyone who got in her way. When they returned to the mansion, everyone seemed busy because there was a visitor. Seeing how everyone was busier compared to when Purina came, it must be someone important. While strolling and pondering how her father sent her away to the capital and never been asked to come to the duchy, Betty encountered an ominous figure. Purina blocked Betty's path and threatened her to be attacked by her dogs. Animals that seemed to have a bad history with Betty, judging by her reaction. As Purina's dogs menacingly approached Betty, she was compelled to run as she recalled how they savagely bit her neck in the capital. "Gosh, Purina, you deserve to be fed to the lions!" Purina chuckled at the sight of a trembling 8-year-old kid she threatened with her dogs. She planned to have the dogs get a smell of Betty so they could track her when she tried to run away again. Poor Betty trembled in fright as the dogs approached her. As she closed her eyes in fear, she suddenly heard the dogs whimper and scurried away. And when she opened her eyes, the young man with a blindfold stood between her and Purina's dogs. What aura does he hold that the ravenous dogs winced and retreated? Just as suddenly as the blindfolded man appeared, Carlitos arrived and stood between the man and Betty. And as a cherry on top of the scene, the Duke also came to the commotion. Before the overprotective father and brother could do something unimaginable to the blindfolded guy for getting near Betty, he quickly explained that he was only trying to help her. He pointed towards Purina and told the Duke that she threatened Betty with her dogs. This enraged the Duke and ordered the guards to kick Purina out of the castle immediately. Witnessing what just happened, the Duke realized that he shouldn't have placed his baby in her care and decided to research what happened in the capital. "Ha! You're cooked, Purina!" Betty thanked the mysterious guy for protecting her, and the latter explained that he simply owed her a favor when they met in the woods. Immediately, the Duke and Carlitos ordered the prince to step back 20 paces from Betty. Wait, Prince? This also came as a shock to Betty when she realized that the mysterious blindfolded guy was the older half-brother of Prince Ritter, who he despises most, Prince Atere. Betty was overjoyed to see someone who could upset Ritter simply with their existence and wanted to team up with him to get back at Ritter. Atere was sent by the royal family to congratulate and thank Duke Aslan for winning the 5-year war. Supposedly, sending a large amount of gold and silver with a big delegation would be most appropriate to congratulate the duchy that just won a war. However, Atere was deliberately sent alone and empty-handed to insult him and the Duke. Atere recalled that during the battle, the royal family also sent him alone as the only support force. He understood that the crown, his father, hated his mere existence. Despite being sent in shame, Atere was glad that he came from the north because he met Betty once again. He decided to visit Betty in a certain form. That night, Betty couldn't fall asleep. Suddenly, a voice called out to her by the name Star from the terrace. A dark shape lurked outside, and they seemed to know each other. Let me guess, it's Atere. Despite being the firstborn of the royal family, Atere's birth was not considered a blessing like others, and the reason was because he was a dragon shifter. The odds of having a dragon shifter baby were rare even between two dragon shifter parents. And with that probability, a child born between a snake shifter, the king, and a dragon shifter, the queen, would certainly be a snake shifter. Atere's mother didn't treat him well because he wasn't born as a snake shifter like his father wanted. And on top of that, his hair color was that of the dark dragon that was said to bring the world to ruins. His eyes also had a deeper color than his father's, which meant that he was a more powerful shapeshifter. His eyes were despised the most, so the king commanded him to cover them with a blindfold that had a special spell so it wouldn't obstruct his eyesight. Everyone feared his eyes, including the king. Meanwhile, Ritter, a snake shifter, was well loved and favored by the crown. Deep inside Atere's heart, he longed for someone who would look into his eyes without fear. And that was until he met Betty. One night, Atere roamed the sky. With his special ability, he could hide himself among the clouds and fly around freely. He saw Betty looking out of a window. As he tried to observe the girl and used a gust of wind to send her back into the room, he didn't notice that came down too close. Before he could retreat, Betty saw his eyes and called them stars because they were sparkling. That was the first time someone compared his eyes to the stars and appreciated their beauty without fear. As a flirty dragon, he nicknamed Betty Star because she sparkled more than his eyes. And since then, he's been Atel, Betty's star. Now that he visited Betty on her terrace, the girl suddenly smacked him and called him a traitor. Atel, or Atere, was puzzled about how Betty concluded. It turned out that in her past life, she asked Ritter if he was the cloud who visited her at night because they had the same eye color. Of course, Ritter deceived her and answered that it was him disguised using magic items. The naive Betty believed in his lie that he was her one and only friend. Betty confronted Atel that she knew that he was Ritter hiding behind the clouds. Before Betty could walk away, Atel decided to reveal his true dragon form to convince her that he was not the snake shifter prince. Betty was convinced that Atel was not Ritter. She remembered that in the books she read, dragon shifters could communicate with humans even in their dragon form, something a squirrel shifter like her couldn't do. Betty explained to the dragon how she ended up in the north and got her name. And when asked about how he ended up in the north, Atel covered up that he was the first Prince Ateris's bodyguard. He used the opportunity to ask Betty her impressions of the first prince, him. Betty told the dragon the truth, that she thought the prince seemed like a Casanova. She explained that Atere was good-looking and called her a lovely lady when they first met, so she was sure he was a player. These answers flustered Atel and defended Atere, or himself, that the first prince probably did it to be nice. In the midst of their talk, Atel sensed that Betty was already sleepy, so he carried her to bed and wished her sweet dreams. Though Betty returned the sweet dreams to Atel, she thought that he was also a playboy like the first prince. It was just enough for Atel to leave the room when Carlitos suddenly barged into Betty's room after sensing something unpleasant. After Betty assured him that no one was with her, he tucked her into bed and reminded her that if someone with dark hair approached her with a smile, she should ignore him. Obviously, it's not Atere. The next day, the servants were busier than usual. Betty wondered what the commotion was all about, and the servant informed her that they were preparing for the victory banquet. To celebrate the end of the long battle, the duchy had decided to hold a victory banquet where people from the capital city were to attend. It was more special because it was the first banquet held in the Aslan mansion in a long time, so everyone was excited. The servants told Betty that the guests from the capital city who attended the previous banquet were condescending and said that the North's events were so unsophisticated. This time, the servants were determined to show the people from the capital what the North had got. Later, an invitation for a tea party arrived for Betty, and guess who it was from? No other than Atere. During the tea party, Carlitos, being the protective brother that he was, showed up uninvited. Carlitos was even more sensitive that just hearing Atere address Betty as my lady was enough to trigger him. While they threw banters at each other, Betty feasted on the tea and the pastries prepared. Atere wondered why Carlitos had his guard up around him and was even more passionate than he had been on the battlefield. Atere urged Carlitos to relax as it was only an innocent invitation to tea. He simply thought it would be a nice idea to have a cute little sister unlike his brother Ritter. Betty sensed that Atere was also on bad terms with Ritter. She thought that it was just Ritter who disliked him. With that new point of view, Betty hoped they might be able to team up and get back at Ritter. After their tea party, the prince stands up and asks for Betty's permission to kiss the back of her hand as a friendly gesture while he introduces himself to her. However, before he can even do that, Carl, being the protective brother that he is, quickly stops and threatens him to not do anything with his sister. Then the ruckus happens, and Betty begins to get irritated with her brother's unnecessary actions. With pure irritation written on her face, she asks him to stop. At this point, she really wants to know the prince's name so she can get closer to him. Despite being so against that idea, Carl walks behind Betty as he watches the prince introducing himself as Atere de Astrum. Upon hearing his name, Betty begins to wonder why the prince's name seems to be the same with Atel's name. Even the places where they came from are the same. What can be the mystery behind that? Meanwhile, in the Duke's office, the Duke is making sure that Purina has the medicine. She does, and shows it to him. The medicine that she was given by the second crown prince. He was able to make that after realizing the abilities that come after with his shape-shifting. But the prince is a noble snake of wisdom who has two powers. So that medicine is either a poison of punishment or medicine of healing. The Duke asks about the payment for the medicine, but before Purina answers the Duke's query, she mentions feeling sorry for the cancelled wedding of the second prince and Betty. Unfortunately, this makes the Duke slam the table due to anger. Her legs wobble as her whole body begins to shake. Her words stutter as she explains that she was asked by the imperial family to send it to him as a thank you to the loyal guardian of the North. No payment required. Viscountess Sears then excuses herself out, wishing Betty good health. Before she can exit, however, the Duke asks her with intensity if she's truly worried for her niece's health. She argues that she wouldn't bring the medicine if she wasn't. Unconvinced, the Duke questions why Purina didn't give the medicine upon arriving and why she's only giving it now that she's kicked out. Her heart races so fast. She knows that if she can't come up with the right answer, something unimaginable might happen to her. The Viscountess knows that the Duke isn't an easy one to fool. Purina's excuse is that the medicine works best during the night when the snake constellation shines the brightest, which she figures is days away, hence her timing. However, Purina slyly thinks that it won't harm Betty, at least not her body, so technically she didn't lie. Meanwhile, Betty, Carl, and Atere are looking at the venue area while arguing about Arthur's blindfold. Betty notices a familiar voice, the voice of Purina. The moment she heard it, it only meant one thing: trouble. And she's right, because by the moment she sees her, she's about to hit someone because of the venue reception, so Betty immediately runs to stop her. Irritated with Betty, Purina swings at her niece. Luckily, an intimidating presence stops her. It's Carl with the prince. Murderous aura surrounds them, clearly not liking what's happening. Atere manages to calm him down since it looks like Betty can handle all of it. Purina laughs and begins to mock Betty by saying that she takes up on the North's poor taste and education. One thing Betty knows about Purina is that she's obsessed with class and elegance. Betty tells her that it's such an ironic thing to do since it's not a very classy thing to raise their hand and slap someone. Hearing that from Betty shocks Purina to the core. Betty wasn't the type of girl to talk back to her. Purina reasons out that she only did that to teach the old-fashioned Northerners a lesson since they'll be holding a big banquet. Yet their taste isn't really that nice considering that the visitor will be from other places. Betty bravely looks at her and says that despite her expertise with handling royalty parties, they won't be needing her help. They don't need the trends from the capital. They can start their own trends in the North. This only made Purina laugh. To her, it sounds ridiculous. But it seems like Betty is serious with what she said, which made the Viscountess just turn her back and go. Betty's act touched the servants, which made them get so excited that they wholeheartedly helped Betty with her plans. For the rest of the day, Betty keeps herself busy by running back and forth to finally execute her plans for the banquet in hopes that everything will go along with her plan. With the use of a rope, Betty starts teaching the servants with different knitting styles, and surprisingly, they seem used to handling ropes due to the rough environment of the North. Macrame. It's the name of the knotting technique that embodies the lifestyles of the Northerners who used ropes as part of their daily life. It isn't just some decorative ornament, it is also a symbol which embodies the Northerners' practices along with the ropes. It isn't just an unfamiliar thing, but also the history of the North itself. In Terry's room, Betty is greeted by a servant who's bringing her cookies. She then respectfully greets and thanks them, which somehow caught Terry's attention. He then tells her how he notices that she's really loved and cared for by the people there, since she's always saying respectful words towards them. Betty casually says to him that she has gotten used to that, since adults won't like it if she won't say respectful words towards them. This somehow got his attention to the point that he asked her to elaborate her experiences with that in the capital. Then, Betty casually opens up about how people always hurt her whenever she isn't respectful towards them. She was told that she had to speak up with utmost respect since she's a halfling. She was abused by those people so casually since no one really cares that much towards her. This made Terry's blood boil to the point that he stops his tea session with Betty and heads to the capital. This is too much for a little girl to bear. There, he asked an investigator to dig deeper and find out the people who did those things to Betty. And when it was all done, Terry gave those documents to the Duke, which made him fuming with anger. The documents sent by Terry and the documents from their spies are really different. There are lapses that he didn't see. He even thought that the capital is good for Betty due to her health condition, but it turns out that she experienced hell there. This was only done by one person, Perina Siurus. Before the guards even get out of the room to look for her, Carl enters, and behind him is Terry holding Perina. Now's finally the time where she'll be confronted by those horrible things that she did. The next morning, Betty is so excited to finally finish decorating the banquet, but then she remembers that her father didn't give her his permission yet to join the party. She exits her room and goes to her father's office, but before she can even enter the room, she hears Perina's voice. The door is slightly open, so she sees Perina kneeling in front of her father, guilt-tripping him by saying that her sister is looking at them down from heaven, and that he shouldn't do such things. However, that only made the Duke want to punish her more. Atera and Carl are there looking at her too. Right there and then, all the revelation begins to unfold. How harshly Betty was treated, and how all the money that the Duke sent to her vanished. The moment Betty hears that, tears start to form in her eyes as she realizes that her father really did send her money. So he really did support her for years, but she didn't even receive a single penny. She even had to wear the same outfit for years despite her clothes having holes. However, can the hole in her heart be sewn like clothes? Despite the struggle she had to endure for years, the only thing she wanted was to receive love. Finally, she enters the room. Her father looks shocked that she was there all the time. She looks at him with eyes desperate for answers, and finally, she asks him if he ever sent her money or if he ever cared about her. Guilt lingers in his body. He looks down as he says that he did. He did send her money, and it's pretty obvious that he cares for her. She's his daughter after all. For Betty, all of this is unbelievable. All her life, she had no one. She wrote letters for him, but got no response. She's been all alone her entire life. She believed that she had no one. Perina made her believe that she was alone. She looks at her father as she confesses that she had always thought that he didn't come to see her because he hated her. If you only knew how much your father cares for you, Betty! But that's completely absurd because he didn't hate her, not even once. He spent all those years protecting the border in hopes that it would keep her safe. But now, he regretted that. He regretted that he wasn't able to protect her during that time. Slowly, he puts his hand on her tiny shoulders and leans his forehead on hers. Tears are falling from his eyes as he apologizes for his actions. By then, he won't ask her to forgive him, but how can Betty not? He's her father. Suddenly, the Duke hugs her, and in an instant, it's as if that hole in her heart that she thought would never be filled is now filled with family love. All of a sudden, Perina interrupts them and even shamelessly asks Betty to speak up for her. How can she? She never even cared for her and even separated her from her father. If not for her, she wouldn't have died. The Duke angrily ordered the servants to take Perina to the basement. The moment she hears the word basement, she immediately tries to explain her action, justifying it by telling that taking away the money was just a minor act. Well, the Duke thinks that calling it a minor act is completely absurd. The servant hands a paper to the Duke with all the lists of horrible things that Purina had done to Beatty. Embezzlement of money, abuse, ignoring servants who bullied her, and not making him know about the law that prohibits households with more than 1,000 soldiers from entering the city. Throughout this time, Purina was planning to engage Beatty with someone. That's why she didn't even bother letting him know about it. All those years, the Duke was tricked by her that his baby was okay and healthy. He even thought that the letters that he received were from Beatty, but they weren't. Hearing all this, tears are forming on Betty's eyes. She misunderstood all of it. Her father really cares for her. You're such a monster, Purina. You were trusted to look after her, not abuse her. The Duke kneels as he wipes away the tears from her eyes. With a comforting voice, he tells his daughter that ever since she was born, no day has passed that he didn't love her. He loves her and forever will because she's his daughter. A faint smile flashes on her face when all of a sudden, she loses consciousness. Worried sick in the room, the Duke asks the doctor if Beatty is sick. The doctor smiles as she comforts him, saying that she isn't. She just lost consciousness because she cried too much. Suddenly, he asks Carl to look after Beatty since he'll take care of Purina. Carl wants to go with him at first, but the Duke tells him that it's better if he'll stay. In the basement, Purina's face lightens the moment she sees the Duke. The moment she gets out of the cell, he smiles at her, telling her that she's right after all. He won't harm her for such minor things. But that smile vanishes the moment she realizes that they're heading to the interrogation room. The Duke looks at her intensely, telling her that she has to pay 100-fold for what she did to his daughter. The moment Betty's eyes open, the very first person she sees is Carl. Carl notices that Betty's eyes were bloodshot, and if she ever shapeshifts by that moment, she'll probably turn as a rabbit and not a squirrel. While tucking her comfortably in her bed, Carl asks Betty why she didn't tell him about the abuse she experienced in the capital, in which she innocently replies that she thought it's pretty normal since people don't really like small animal shapeshifters. Carl thinks that's ridiculous. It's not and will never be normal to experience abuse and harassment. It's just really sad that all of these became such a normal thing for her. He stares at Betty's eyes and makes her promise to tell him whenever she experiences those things again. All of a sudden, the Duke enters and agrees to what Carl had said. Everyone who dares to do those things to her again will suffer the consequences of their actions. Again, tears form in her eyes as she realizes that she now has a family. There are now people who love her and care for her. All of a sudden, Betty tells her father how much she wants to go and see her Aunt Purina since she stole her money. The Duke appreciates how much she wants to get it, but still thinks that it'll be better if they send their man. However, considering that Betty knows her better, she still wants to go with them. But with her condition, he can't let her do that right now. He can only let her go to Purina once she gets the medication. Condition? Betty is unaware that she has some kind of condition. It turns out that she was frail since birth and Purina has the medication for it. It turns out that the second prince, a snake shapeshifter who has the innate ability to make poison or medication, made some medication and gave it to Purina. Suddenly, Betty feels insecure with her shapeshifting skills. Her father notices the difference in her mood. So he comforts her, telling her that everyone's awakening period is different, so sooner or later she'll get hers too. Just with that, a ray of smile flashes on her face, telling him that she isn't minding it anymore. But behind those smiles are worries creeping inside her mind. Even after her coming-of-age ceremony, not a single ability has ever showed up. At this point, she's sure that she doesn't have any special abilities. The moment they exit Betty's room, the Duke looks seriously at Carl and tells him to go to the capital and do whatever they want, even if it means killing those people who hurt Betty. On the terrace, Betty keeps on thinking about the medicine and even Ritter's innate ability, which is poison, when all of a sudden, Atere the dragon shows up to visit her. Betty asks Atere what kind of innate ability he has. It seems like she doesn't really know that innate abilities are only shared to families or lovers. If she's a stranger, Atere will surely think she's rude. However, he just answered that his innate ability is linked to the constellations. They can control things like rain, thunder, and fog. As they talk about shape-shifting powers, Betty wonders about Ritter's power since his ability is venom. Atel wonders why she knows that, though he argues, isn't it natural since a snake shifter's innate ability is either secret medicine or secret venom? However, for him, all of this doesn't really make sense. Last time he heard that the second prince's shape-shifting power isn't strong enough to have a vengeance ability. He really had no idea that his powers had awakened. However, despite what he said, Beatty isn't really sure with all of this. It still can be poison and not medicine. The next morning, the Duke visits Purina together with Beatty. The moment Purina sees Beatty, her face turns sour as she yells at her, asking why it took her such a long time to visit her. And because of that, the Duke's aura darkens as he points out her attitude, causing her to quickly act nicely. Beatty then asks Purina about the medicine that the second prince gave her. Purina's face suddenly turns strangely kind as she quickly reassures her that the medicine is good for her. But is it? Beatty doesn't really believe her. She looks at her and wonders if that isn't really medicine, but rather a poison. She smirks, but still tries to hide it and persuade Beatty that it isn't a poison. To make sure, Beatty follows Ateri's suggestion to make Purina try it first. Shocked and torn between doing it or not, Purina didn't know what to do. Either way, she'll end up in a dark situation. Well, she'll suffer those consequences either way. Suddenly, she slaps the potion out of Betty's hand and kneels for forgiveness from the Duke, who is now fuming with anger. How dare she try to kill his baby? Ready to slay her neck with his sword, Betty holds her father's hand, having a much better plan. Rather than killing her, why not take away the thing that she values more than her life? Embezzlement, child abuse, and attempted murder. Those are the things that Purina did to Betty, and basing it on the court of law, it can be paid by material things like gold. The moment Purina hears this, she desperately agrees to it, thinking that it's just that. But upon careful consideration, she had insufficient funds to pay for her crimes. Her gold isn't just enough. She also has to give up her household, land, and even her title. That's such an embarrassing and smart punishment. Then it hits her. She kneels and begs in front of Betty. She was a noble the moment she was born. That's the only thing that makes her above others. Purina even reminds her of her mother and how much she cherishes her. And that's where it hurts Betty the most. Her mother cherished Purina that she even trusted her with Betty, but she always speaks ill of her and even used her assets to expand the mansion. So now Betty will take back all of her mom's inheritance that Purina stole in the form of interest by using her nobility patent. She found it in the jewelry box next to the family head's ring. The nobility patent can be destroyed only with the power of the family head's ring. They say if someone who isn't part of the family by blood wears the ring, they'll be cursed. But since the blood of the seeress family runs through her, the sacred ring may acknowledge her right as the family head. In an instant, Purina's nobility patent is destroyed, and Betty quickly becomes the family head. And just with that, Purina's world crushes in front of her. Without a hint of guilt on her face, Betty looks at her aunt and quickly turns her back. She's looking forward to what Purina can do without her title and wealth. However, the Duke isn't really content with what his daughter did. Before he even exits the basement, he looks at the knight and asks for something. And when he left, the knight drags Purina into a cell full of human bones, where she had her last breath as she was attacked by a monster, leading to her gruesome demise. Meanwhile, a spy reports to the queen that after Purina is sent to the prison in the basement of Gonggong, the information is cut off. After knowing this, the queen is angry since the Duke may find out about the snake man's poison and thinks it may make the Duke suspect that the royal family caused it. The queen then commands the spy to inform others that a stranger's evil hand steals the royal poison, making it clear that the royal family has never hurt anyone. After commanding, the queen remembers that the people started praising Duke Aslan when he won the Great War, leaving the royal family in the shadows. Because of this, Duke Aslan's existence threatens the royal family, which is why the royal family tries to kill him but fails. The royal family also tries to kill Duke Aslan's son, but his young son's body is also well trained, making them attack Duke Aslan's daughter since Betty is also the Duke's weakness. The royal family then tries to poison Betty to make Duke Aslan follow them and voluntarily become the royal puppet, but his plan also fails. Ritter then asks the queen if his poison did not work. The queen assures him that there is no problem with the poison he made and that it's not his fault. She also tells Ritter that another opportunity will always exist, even if their plan fails. The following day, while Betty happily plays with the lion, Ateri curiously points out how scared she is after seeing the guard dogs. Betty then tells Ateri that those guard dogs attacked her while this lion was so friendly, hugging the lion. Next, Betty happily thanks Ateri for helping her since she hears that Ateri also inquired about what happened in the capital. Betty then gleefully tells Ateri she is willing to do anything for him. After hearing this, Ateri asks Betty if she can call him Brother Ateri, as she calls Brother Carl. But then Carl appears in front of them with a murderous aura and angrily tells Atari that he has no right to make Betty call him brother. Still startled, Atari then tries to defend Betty, saying that Betty is why he ran with his bare feet. Thus, it is enough to consider him also her brother, which Carl quickly disapproves of. Betty then stops Atari and Carl from arguing by asking Carl where he's been these past few days. Carl answers that he's doing some small business and can't tell much since Betty will probably scold him. Atari then interferes and again asks Betty to call him Brother Atari. Betty then tells Atari that she can't call him that, which makes Atari feel down. Atari then tells Betty that she can call him by his name only and no royal title, which Betty then agrees to. Betty then approaches him and explains that she won't hate calling him brother, but it is because she only has Carl as her brother. After that, while Betty walks in front of them, Carl reminds Atari to treat Betty as his sister and nothing more. The busy preparation for the banquet is finally done in the following days. After seeing the outcome, Betty feels satisfied and asks Atari what he thinks about the banquet. Atari then tells Betty that he is surprised since he didn't know he would find this kind of elegance in the north, since the place before does give off a sense of dryness and stiffness. True enough, the guests are taken aback by the sophistication of the place, a sight that leaves them in awe. Hearing their praises, Betty smiles, knowing she had foreseen the banquet's success. Then it's Duke Aslan's turn. His eyes shine with pride as he takes the stage. He welcomes everyone, but his focus is on his daughter Betty. He praises her for the banquet, and his words are a testament to his admiration. He continues to talk about Betty, his praise unwavering until his butler reminds him of the main event. Duke Aslan then introduces Betty to everyone, his pride evident in every word, filling the room with the warmth of family support. After, Betty greets everyone and informs them that she has a special gift to share. As she unveils it, the guests' expressions change, their curiosity turning to surprise upon seeing the unusual green liquid. Betty then explains that it is an herbal tea made from the walnuts that is good for one's health. She adds that green things don't always taste good, setting the stage for a magic trick. She creates a flame, causing the green liquid to melt and transform into a beautiful yellow color, captivating the guests. As the guests enjoy her tea, Betty reflects on her journey. She had prepared this tea as a safety net, a plan B in case she was rejected. But now she realizes it's not necessary. She has a loving family by her side, a testament to her personal growth and resilience. While the guests are busy dancing on the dance floor, Betty sits at the side and is amazed by what she sees since this is her first banquet. But then, her eyes begin to drop. Noticing this, Duke Aslan approaches and carries her to her room. While they're walking, Betty requests that the Duke write her a letter, which the Duke gladly agrees to. Meanwhile, Jaleo glared at Betty from afar and blamed her for his unsuccessful plans. "Sir, please leave Betty alone now that she can smile freely." The following day, Betty is practicing talking to Atari without the honorifics. When Atari notices that Betty is getting used to it, he compliments and praises her. Meanwhile, the Duke and Carl are emitting a murderous and jealous aura beside them since they don't like how close Betty and Atari are. Carl then speaks up and tells Atari to leave, but Betty stops him and defends Atari by reminding Carl that Atari is her friend. Hearing this, Duke Aslan realizes that even if he also wants to get rid of Atari, he can't deny that he helped Betty a lot in solving the case in the Imperial City, thus he decides to make him stay for a while. The following day, Frederick and the other officials report to Duke Aslan that the royals informs them that they regret what happened about Tuesday's Vidocq usage. They also notify the Duke that there are also victims since their Vidocq was stolen, which the Duke finds intriguing. Duke Aslan then commanded them that every trade between the Essen Kingdom and Bruklik Kingdom would not be allowed in the Imperial City, thus predicting that the royal family would suffer a massive loss from the embargo. Frederick then points out that gold products and silk will be cut down, therefore they can refuse the royal family's help in the preparation. But one official points out that they must wait to do it since the king directly wrote a letter of grievance. They can also not find any evidence either. Hearing this, Duke Aslan starts to get angry. Noticing this, Frederick starts to alleviate the Duke's anger by talking about how brilliant Betty's idea is. It will help them with food supply since it's been cold lately and famine might occur. Remembering this, Duke Aslan smiles and instructs Frederick to prepare a gift for Betty. Betty again saves the day. After instructing, the Duke remembers the first time he held Betty in his arms, and right then and there, he knows that he's willing to give her anything. Next, Betty arrives at Duke Aslan's office and wants to give him the warm potion that enhances fatigue, which makes the Duke happy, but Betty panics after realizing that she might drop it. Thus, when she tries to find it in her bag, some papers fall from it, which causes her to panic. Betty then tries to calm down, since the Duke might think it's just ordinary papers. Then Carl notices that they are letters and helps Betty pick them up. While helping her, Carl notices that the letter has his father's handwriting and curiously asks Betty why she carries it. Hearing this, Betty grabs the letters and explains to them that these are precious treasures that her father wrote. She knows it might be weird to keep letters, but for her, they are a treasure, especially the sentimental things that the Duke wrote to her, since she did not receive a single letter in the past. Hearing this, the Duke then promises Betty that he will write 10 times a day for her. But then Carl stops him and tells him that he'll be the one to do it, since the Duke might be busy. Yeah, right. It's more like Carl is jealous because Betty might like the Duke more than him. Next, Duke Aslan talks about Betty's upcoming birthday, which Carl also remembers, and then suggests a gift they will give Betty. Still, their talk is interrupted by Betty, who curiously asks him if a birthday present exists and that it is not only books. Duke Aslan and Carl look at Betty and tell her that they always send her birthday gifts yearly, but Betty tells them that she has never received anything special. After hearing this, Carl and Duke Aslan are enraged and give a murderous aura, thinking of wanting to kill Purina and that the punishment they give her is lenient after knowing what Purina did. Betty then excitedly asks them if there will also be a birthday cake during her birthday, to which Duke Aslan agrees. Next, Duke Aslan instructs his men to prepare the grandest birthday party for Betty, and notes that the price doesn't matter. They gladly agree and proceed to organize the party. Meanwhile, Jaleo is angry at how the guards treat him and calls them idiots because they can't recognize the next patriarch. One servant then informs Jaleo that a guest from the capital will soon visit. Jaleo then asks who it is, and the servant tells him the name. After learning this, Jaleo asks if it is true, which the servant confirms by showing him the letter. Knowing this, Jaleo smiles and comments that the snakes are awake. The following day, while Betty is reading about the magic stone, she suddenly remembers Ritter. Before returning to life, Ritter sold the magic stone he found to the aristocrats and bragged about the huge profit he gained. Thus, Betty wonders when he will find the stone and how Ritter will do it. Betty's thoughts are cut off when a maid informs her that Duke Aslan wants to see her. Betty then starts to wonder why Duke Aslan called her upon arriving at the indoor garden. Duke Aslan and the other people surprise Betty with a party. Upon seeing this, Betty informs Duke Aslan that it is not her birthday while excitedly scanning the whole place. Duke Aslan then tells her he can do this any time, not just during an occasion. Next, Duke Aslan presents Betty with a pony while telling her that it's an Alipe foal, and that she can ride it in the duchy. Betty then approaches the pony and starts to play with it. An expensive horse to play around with? The Duke loves her very much. While Betty is busy playing with her new horse, Frederick reminds the Duke about his meeting. Thus, the Duke informs Betty about this. When the Duke is about to leave, Betty thanks her father for the present. The Duke then tells her that she doesn't need to be formal and that all he wants as a thank you is for her to smile. Hearing this, Betty looks and smiles at him warmly. At the office, they look at the list of people visiting from the capital to discuss the war fees. Carl then points out that Ritter is also one of the guests. Frederick comments that usually only important vassals can come when they want to talk about money, but since the second prince is also on the list, it might mean something else. Duke Aslan thinks that Ritter's arrival might interrupt Betty's marriage, so he thinks that it is good since he doesn't need to visit Ritter anymore. Duke Aslan then instructs Frederick to prepare for their guest while giving a murderous aura. I think revenge is coming for you, Ritter. Meanwhile, Betty tells Atera about her dilemma. She receives a gift from her father and cannot think of anything to give in return for the Duke. Hearing this, Atera tells Betty that he knows what the Duke likes and that the Duke will surely love it. He then tells Betty that she only needs to call the Duke Papa. After hearing this, Betty thinks Atera's plan is absurd. That night, Betty still thinks of a gift for Duke Aslan and suddenly remembers Atera's suggestion. But when she looks at the sky, she notices the star and realizes it is Atel. Atel then asks Betty why she's outside and states that she might freeze. Betty then replies that it is Atera's fault since she wants to show her gratitude to her father, but his suggestion is so simple that she only needs to run to the Duke and call him Papa. Betty then tells Atel that she's disappointed since Atera is just making fun of them. Hearing this, Atel tells Betty that Atera's plan is favorable, and Betty agrees to use Atera's plan. Atel then informs Betty that he'll be leaving for a while since Atera is requested to move since a guest from the north will arrive. Atel then assured her that it will only be for a while and that he would return soon. When Betty arrives at the table a few days later, Duke Aslan shows her the fruit biscuits he prepared. Betty then proceeds with her plan, runs to the Duke, and calls him Papa. After hearing this, the Duke spills the biscuits, thus making her think he hates it. Still, the Duke assures her that she can call him anything she wants and turns to Carl. But then Carl quickly tells him that he will never call him Papa, to which the Duke replies that he's just showing off. Next, while Betty is busy picking berries and remembering the Duke's happy face, Leader suddenly approaches her, which shocks her. Leader then tells Betty that he feels lucky since she still remembers him. "Please, someone grab a shovel! There's a dangerous snake in the yard!" Noticing that Betty keeps staring at him, Leader assumes that Betty is just like any other person who wants his attention, and that her slapping him during their first meeting is obviously because she wants to get his attention at all costs. Leader then tells Betty that he understands her actions, and that she only acts that way because she wants him to notice her. Hearing this, Betty looks at him weirdly and laughs after seeing that Leader's tooth fell out. Betty teases Leader about it, which makes Leader feel embarrassed, thus he leaves Betty alone. While walking away, Leader realizes that Betty is the only one who always makes fun of and laughs at him, and that no one in the Imperial Palace dares to treat him this way. Next, while Leader is walking to the meeting, he thinks about making Duke Aslan bow or kneel to humiliate Betty. Leader then feels confident after remembering his mother telling him that even golden lions must bow to him. Leader also remembers how his father is angry because the Duke asks for considerable money to save their country. Upon arriving at the office, Leader quickly notices a heavy murderous aura surrounding it. When he looks where it belongs, he notices Duke Aslan and Carl glaring at him, making him flinch. Baron Evan notices Leader's involuntary movement. Thus, he thinks that the palace made the wrong decision to send Leader since he gets flustered and agitated by the Duke. Baron Evan then informs them that he is the one who accompanies Leader while thinking that he must persuade the Duke to help him since they're out of options and their finances will only last a year or two. While Baron Evan explains, Leader notices that the Duke is different from what his mother tells him, and that the Duke, while he bows to him, still shows his malice. But after noticing this, Leader cockily thinks it may be because of what Betty, his daughter, did to him last. Thus, he tells the Duke that he understands Betty's action the previous time they met, and that it may be an act to get his attention. Evan then shockingly stares at Leader and realizes he might not know they need to make the Duke like them and help them. Carl then stops Leader and tells him to shut his mouth since he deserved the slap his sister did to him last time. Yes, show Leader his place, Carl. He must be dragged down from his high horse. Duke Aslan tells Leader that Carl is correct, and that Leader should have been grateful to Betty, while mocking what is the purpose of saving a prick who is trying to force a marriage without his daughter's consent. Then, Carl asks Leader to leave while threatening Leader not to get any closer to Betty, because if he does, he'll make Leader regret his life. Next, while already in his room, Leader throws a vase to relieve his anger toward the Aslan family. He then vows to make them suffer for insulting him. Afterward, Leader calms himself and remembers Jaleo telling him that the good things come after the challenge is over. Thus, he also vows to make those lions know who their true master is and make them kneel. Meanwhile, Carl visits Betty in her room and reminds her not to trust snakes or reptiles, especially dragons. This is more like don't trust Leader and a Terre reminder. Carl is still jealous of a Terre. A few days later, while in her squirrel form, Betty is enjoying an acorn on top of the tree when she suddenly sees Leader and Jaleo talking secretly. Betty has stumbled upon the two's secret meeting. Jaleo greets Leader, who states it is their first meeting since they only communicate through letters. After hearing this, Betty realizes that they have known each other before and are already quite acquainted. Noticing that Leader is scanning the place, Jaleo assures him it is safe to talk since he can guarantee that there are no guards during this shift, and that there are not many obstacles around so they can easily see someone coming. Jaleo then asks how Leader's meeting with the Duke went, to which Leader replies and points out how rude the Aslan people are. Leader adds that Betty made fun of him when he said he would accept her as his fiancée, even though she had many shortcomings. Hearing this, the squirrel Betty starts to squeak in protest but stops and hides when Leader looks her way. Next, Jaleo reports to Leader that their plan is running smoothly and that the place they bought is astonishing. Nobody, even the Duke, can find its entrance. When Jaleo starts to talk about the magic stone, Leader quickly stops him and reminds him never to speak of it, and Jaleo quickly apologizes. After their talk, Leader and Jaleo walk in opposite directions to avoid suspicion. After hearing everything, the squirrel-formed Betty, who smiles after hearing about the magic stone, exudes the same malicious, albeit toned-down aura of the Aslan family. Yeah, ruin their plans! You will make the cutest villainess! At the palace library, Betty digs into every record she can find, determined to understand the Goblin Stone's true power. With the knowledge from her past life pushing her forward, she quietly decides this relic will be her next big goal. Honestly, her research mode is always adorable. Meanwhile, on the other side of the palace, Count Gelio initiates his scheme. He approaches Leonhardt, requesting permission to survey the suburban mountains under the pretense that a wealthy buyer wants to purchase the land. One assistant immediately raises an eyebrow, sensing something off. But Count Gelio argues the profit would be massive for Aslan. Leonhardt, however, keeps his thoughts to himself. Just as Count Gelio tries to sway him further, Betty steps into her father's office. The assistant quickly updates her on the situation, unknowingly blowing Count Gelio's cover. Betty instantly recognizes the signs. If someone wants that land badly, something suspicious is brewing. She questions Count Gelio, who stiffens at her interference. Before he can redirect the conversation, Betty announces her own theory that the land might contain goblin stones. She even presents a book she found as evidence, insisting the area should be investigated before they sell the land to the buyer. Her confidence could rival a seasoned politician at this point. Count Gelio grows uneasy, desperately downplaying the idea and calling the search pointless. But Betty refuses to let go, stating she intends to locate the goblin stones and secure them at a huge value for Aslan. Leonhardt and Pegris exchange looks, assuming this is simply another imaginative adventure from their charming daughter. Yet Betty's determination and her irresistible childish enthusiasm wins them over. They soon agree to let her explore the mountains for answers. Their group arrives at the suburban mountains and, guided by Betty's memory, stands before a waterfall. Good thing Leader bragged about the Goblin Stone's location. For once, he isn't delusional but actually useful. Following the details from Leader's old storytelling, Betty leads the knights inside the waterfall's hidden cave. They push forward until meeting what appears to be a dead end. Spirits begin to drop, but Betty encourages them, digging deep into her memories for the crucial details she's missing. With a spark of recollection, she finds the entrance. As she touches the stone wall, it begins to fall apart, revealing a breathtaking crystal-filled cavern. The Goblin Stone Cave. The deeper they walk into the crystal cavern, everyone remains mesmerized by the glittering walls, until Leonhardt suddenly halts. His expression shifts sharply, sensing something ahead. The knights quickly raise their guard, forming a protective circle around Betty as they advance. Soon, the source of his tension reveals itself. A group of birds, each one made entirely of jewels. Their glass-like wings shimmer under the cave's light, creating a surreal display. The jeweled birds edge toward the group, prompting the knights to tighten formation. But while the adults are tense, Betty is absolutely enchanted. She steps forward with wide-eyed awe, admiring the glittering creatures. The moment the birds hear her voice, they copy the sound perfectly. This sends Betty into pure delight. She moves closer, testing their mimicry with cheerful greetings, and the jeweled birds repeat her again. Leonhardt quietly worries she might get hurt, but Betty assures him these birds only copy voices and seem harmless. Honestly, she has more trust in random magical animals than most people do in their own family. With her confidence leading the way, she begins chatting with the birds using different animal noises. True to form, the jeweled flock copies each sound, following her like she's their new playmate. But the playful moment abruptly shifts when one bird starts trembling violently as if in distress. The knights instantly step in front of Betty, assuming an attack is coming. Instead, the trembling bird lurches forward and spills out a massive jewel onto the ground. The group freezes. The knights stare, speechless and mildly horrified, trying to process the fact that they just watched a jewel get produced in the most unpleasant way possible. Nothing like the glamorous treasure moment they imagined. Realizing this is the Goblin Stone source they're looking for, the knights prepare to retrieve it, but Betty quickly stops them. She reasons that the birds might not want their creation taken for free and suggests offering a trade instead. Determined, she looks for something shiny to barter with. Leonhardt hands her his golden badge, and Betty presents it with her sweetest negotiation face. The jeweled bird flutters closer to inspect the gleaming badge, only to turn away in complete disinterest. Betty stands frozen in disbelief, one by one offering every shiny object she has, hairpins, trinkets, anything with a sparkle. But the jeweled birds reject each attempt with the same boredom. Betty's patience snaps. A fiery aura flares around her like a small but determined volcano. She refuses to give up. Negotiation mode activated. These birds have no idea who they're dealing with. Betty rummages through her bag, searching for anything the jeweled birds might like. An acorn branch slips out and lands on the floor. One bird darts forward, snatching it and flying off eagerly. Betty cheers at her success, only to have another acorn knocked away by the same bird. She gathers the acorns and realizes the bird only wants the branch. Finally, they understand the birds prefer nesting materials. With that insight, the trade goes smoothly. A jeweled bird nudges a goblin stone toward them, and the knights rush outside to gather more branches for additional stones. By sunrise, the group returns with plenty of goblin stones, celebrating a successful mission. Everyone praises Betty's clever thinking, though she still worries about thanking the birds properly. She asks Leonhardt to bring them branches from various trees next time, and he agrees warmly, amused by her gentle nature. The knights overhear and start comparing Betty to virtuous historical figures, chatting proudly about her all the way home. Meanwhile, at the palace, Count Jaleo explodes in anger over another failed plan, striking his subordinate. Leader calmly announces he will report his failure. Jaleo tries to bribe him into silence, threatening to expose royal secrets. Leader pauses, then grins. He sweetly assures Jaleo that he will deliver all the details to his mother. Outside, Leader's smile fades into a sneer as he mutters his real intentions, clearly planning to get rid of Jaleo before more trouble arises. Betty's cleverness earns her triumph, while the palace schemers face unexpected consequences. Back at the palace, Johanna notices Betty's cheerful mood and gently asks what has her so delighted. Betty keeps the real reason to herself, holding back laughter as she remembers Leader's dramatic exit from Aslan. Johanna completely misunderstands and thinks Betty is simply happy about the successful Goblin Stone search. She tucks Betty into bed while Betty quietly giggles at the memory. The next morning, Betty screams in shock after looking in the mirror. Later at breakfast, Carl immediately notices that her meal is smaller than usual and that she's barely eating. Before anyone can question her, Betty excuses herself and returns to her room. Inside, she shifts into her squirrel form and looks at the mirror again. When she touches her front tooth, it wiggles. Panic takes over. She sinks to the floor, overwhelmed by the idea that this is some sort of karma and convinced others will laugh at her. Carl begins searching for her, but Betty hides to avoid being seen. Her luck runs out when Carl eventually finds her. Brought back to the dining room where another full plate is waiting, Carl urges her to eat properly, but her hesitation only makes him more concerned. He gently asks her why she's been skipping meals and hiding from everyone. With no escape left, Betty finally admits the truth. She shows him her loose tooth and trembles with embarrassment. Carl immediately comforts her and explains that children her age commonly lose teeth. He asks to check how loose it is. Betty reluctantly lets him. As Carl leans in to examine it, a servant suddenly calls his name. The surprise makes him jolt forward and he accidentally knocks the tooth out. It pops free, leaving a small gap in a very shocked Betty. Carl apologizes over and over while Betty sits stiffly, refusing to even glance his way. She stews in her thoughts, angrier at the embarrassment than the tooth itself. Leonhardt steps in and tries to lighten the mood. He tells her a story about a tooth fairy who collects lost teeth and leaves a gift in return. Betty immediately brightens. That night, she carefully slides her tooth under her pillow and falls asleep with high expectations. By morning, she races to Joanna with a beaming smile, proudly showing the tooth fairy's gift. It is a contract allowing her to manage the oak forest. Johanna is stunned, clearly recognizing Leonhardt's involvement. Betty starts asking all sorts of questions about fairies, but Joanna cleverly changes the subject and reminds her that breakfast is waiting. After eating, Betty relaxes completely and enjoys her meal without worrying about her missing tooth. With her stomach full, she settles against her favorite tree and slowly drifts to sleep. While she naps, soft footsteps approach. Ateri finds her curled up and quietly chuckles at the sight, remembering how attached she is to trees of her preference. He places a handkerchief decorated with little squirrels over her and leaves without waking her. Later, Betty wakes and immediately notices the handkerchief. Something about it feels familiar, almost personal. She hurries back to the palace where Ateri is preparing to depart after speaking with Leonhardt and Carl. She calls out to him and proudly shows the handkerchief he left behind, explaining that she recognizes his scent on it and treasures the gift. Wanting to return the kindness, she asks Ateri what he would like from her in exchange. His resolve melts instantly. Faced with her bright eyes and heartfelt sincerity, he cannot refuse her offer. Betty and Ateri arrive at the village festival, and Betty is instantly enchanted. Colorful stalls, lively music, and the smell of food fill the air. She spins around, eyes sparkling at every detail. Before they move deeper into the crowd, Atari quietly reaches out to hold her hand, but Carl steps between them, telling Atari to keep his distance. Carl takes his role as guardian very seriously, whether anyone asked or not. The three explore together, Atari reluctantly trailing behind. Betty enjoys a grilled skewer and reminds Carl of a promise she made to Atari. Carl teases and Atari mocks him for being overprotective. Their playful argument lightens the mood as they continue through the festival. They spot Pegris and head toward him. He explains he's monitoring the food stand Betty suggested and points out its location. Before they can follow him, a knight's angry shout draws their attention. A stranger is being scolded, and Betty immediately notices a curious device on his belt. She realizes this might be Bane, the brilliant inventor destined to change the world but doomed by excessive drinking. She cannot ignore someone with that kind of talent. Betty calls him, asking about the device. Bane nervously explains it's a pocket knife he designed, stumbling under Carl's intense gaze. His confidence returns when Betty praises his work, showing genuine interest. When Bane's stomach growls, Betty invites him to join their meal. She then gently takes Atari's hand, telling him she will lead the way this time. The small gesture melts him instantly. Betty's charm is quietly bending the world around her. Bane devours the food on the table with impressive speed. Plate after plate piles up, leaving everyone staring silently at the growing tower. When the waiter returns with drinks and mentions alcohol, Betty immediately requests a switch to non-alcoholic options. She refuses to let fate repeat itself with Bane. Once Bane finishes eating, he finally relaxes and admits his true age. Despite his older appearance, he is still quite young. Everyone is taken aback, and Betty firmly tells him to avoid alcohol for his own good. Bane accepts her advice without hesitation, touched by how sincerely she cares. He then opens up about his past. His father borrowed money from everyone in town, leaving Bane unable to find investors. He grew up carrying those burdens and learned to survive with his talent alone. The table falls quiet for a moment, then each of them offers him encouragement, trying to uplift his mood. Bane tears up from the unexpected kindness. Betty hands him a tissue as she prepares a contract. As she introduces her plan to use his inventions for her business, she invites him to work with her. When Bane reads the document, his eyes widen at the amount he would be paid, nervously asking if the number is real. Betty beams with confidence and tells him she believes his creations will one day change the nation. Bane breaks into grateful tears and signs the contract on the spot. He promises to stay away from alcohol and devotes all future inventions to Betty's business. A few days pass. Back at the palace, three people gather before Betty: an engineer, the head chef, and Bane. She asks if they are all willing to collaborate with her. To her surprise, they accepted without hesitation. The three officially form a team, and Betty feels her dream becoming more and more real. She walks through the halls with renewed determination, holding her proposal tightly. She stops in front of Leonhardt's office, ready to take the next step. Betty steps into her father's office with confidence and hands him her proposal. She explains her desire to start a business, expressing how serious she is. Leonhardt reads through the document while Pegris looks over his shoulder. Both are impressed by the careful planning and solid research Betty has done. Encouraged by their reactions, Betty digs into her bag and places all her precious belongings on the table, offering every treasured item she has in exchange for investment funds. Leonhardt warmly smiles as he hands her the key to his warehouse, telling her to take whatever funds she needs. Betty throws her arms around him, grateful, promising to repay him once her business begins earning money. Leonhardt stops her immediately, not wanting to accept any payment in return, only the chance to support whatever she dreams of. Betty stands firm and insists that an official investment deserves proper returns. She wants to run her business fairly and professionally. Leonhardt and Pegris are stunned by her resolve, yet both are proud to see just how far she's grown. Days later, Betty and her newly formed team gather for the first official meeting. They settle plans, share ideas, and agree on the path ahead. After the meeting ends, Betty heads towards Leonhardt's office. On her way, Count Jalio suddenly appears with a smile. He expresses interest in investing in her business. Betty politely rejects him, explaining that she already secured her funds and finalized her plans. She excuses herself and walks away, leaving Count Jalio frozen with anger. His expression twists as he storms out of the palace. Inside the office, Betty rushes to Leonhardt and immediately shares her concerns about Count Jalio. expressing her suspicions, hoping her father will take them seriously. Weeks earlier, Beatty had sat beside Leonhardt and revealed everything she overheard between Ritter and Count Gelio. Leonhardt thanked her for telling him, admitting how troubled he was that Count Gelio ignored the pact he made with all who served Aslan. He reassured Beatty that he would investigate and also confided his suspicion that the royal family might be involved behind the scenes. Back in the present, Beatty updates her father on her brief encounter with Count Gelio. Leonhardt shares the results of his investigation. Discovering Count Gelio's involvement in schemes that harmed the Aslan family, he stripped him of his title and income. Beatty then makes a bold request. She asks for a list of Count Gelio's associates and urges Leonhardt to allow Count Gelio to move freely for now, intending to use her business as bait to expose him. Leonhardt hands over the documents, placing his full trust in her. Days pass as Beatty continues meeting with her team. She thanks each of them for their dedication and contributions. When the meeting ends and everyone leaves, she stays behind just long enough to set the next stage of her plan, leaving all their research and documents openly on the table, exactly where they will be seen. The moment Beatty steps out, a maid slips into the room with an unsettling smile, noticing the documents spread all through the table, eagerly examining them. What she does not realize is that Beatty is watching from the hallway with quiet amusement. The trap has officially been set. Beatty and Ateri enjoy a peaceful tea party in the garden, with pastries and sweets piled around them. Carl sits nearby, watching Ateri with suspicion. When Ateri stands to leave, Carl questions him. Ateri calmly expresses he has no desire to return to a place where he's unwelcome. Beatty worries but brightens as Ateri praises her business launch. Leonhardt arrives, announcing the parlor's interior is complete and asks if she wants to see it. Carl and Ateri eagerly want to join, but Beatty insists she will invite them another time and wants to go with her father first. Carl grumbles, but she stays firm. On the opening day, the shop fills with excited customers. Beatty beams as people admire her products. When a customer comments on the design, she explains her branding. Any item marked with an acorn is authentic, making it easy to spot counterfeits. Count Gelio enters, congratulating her and asking to browse. Beatty smiles, ready for her plan. As he inspects the shelves, he stiffens and signals his assistant. The assistant returns with a macrame piece nearly identical to hers. The crowd gathers, murmuring as the items are compared. Gelio presses Beatty to explain, trying to corner her in front of everyone. Beatty remains calm, knowing this is exactly the moment she has been waiting for. Everyone in the marketplace erupts with gossip, buzzing like bees around a spilled honeypot. The crowd swells, eyes glued to Count Gelio, who tries to slip away with a polite apology, hoping to avoid turning the spectacle into disaster. Beatty cuts him off. She wants this over and done with here and now. Her calm confidence stuns Gelio, but he still tries to negotiate, pretending he seeks only the truth. As he mentions someone in her staff may be a liar, that's the last straw. Beatty snaps, walking towards him, explaining the differences between his macrame and hers, tucking on one piece until it disintegrates like wet paper. Threads flutter to the floor. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Gelio is ready to explode. Beatty continues, explaining how they made their product step by step while Gelio yells in the background, as she asks him to show the rest of his products so everyone can examine them. Her confidence alone crushes him. Shankrante arrives just in time, holding earlier drafts of their design. As Gelio prepares another excuse, Shankrante shuts him down with a look. Gelio swallows his words. Beatty demonstrates the development of their product, explaining trial issues. The contrast is clear. Her macrame holds firm. His, however, falls apart with a gentle pull. The crowd shifts to her side, as she demands to know how he stole their idea before it was finalized. Gelio stammers. Beatty highlights the outrageous price of his flimsy work, then shows hers, sturdy, affordable, and unbeatable. She shakes it like a victory flag. Gelio crumbles, muttering an apology and blaming his staff. Beatty refuses to let him slip away, calling out his behavior and insisting he take real responsibility. Shankrante and Bane grab him and escort him out. Beatty smiles in pure satisfaction. Nearby, two young boys watch Beatty from a distance, realizing they may have just found the person they've been searching for. Beatty feels grateful for the hard work of her team. Since their shop is doing well, she prepares incentive money for everyone. Her team becomes joyful, as if all their muscle pain instantly heals. Money is life, after all. When they're about to finish up, the store's door rings as Beatty welcomes His Majesty Atere and Carl, her brother. Carl arrives last, even though he wishes to be her first customer since he can't locate her earlier. If he is there when someone picks on her, he swears he will slash them. That is exactly why she keeps it away from him. Suddenly, Carl pulls out his sword, ready to strike anyone who has been following him all day. The two cute twins become frightened by his sudden aggression. Beatty steps forward to defend them. Carl asks the children why they are following him. The twins explain that they are searching for the lion, and they assume it is Beatty. Carl confidently insists that he is the lion, but the twins shake their heads and say they're looking for Beatty because she defeats the snake. The twins begin excitedly storytelling everything they know. They recalled that their elder sister interrupted their complaining to remind them that she must leave for work under Mr. Jello. She reminds them that the one who defeats the snake, Jello, is the real lion. Beatty and Carl return to the estate afterward. She gives the box to the Duke, which the twins left earlier, where notes were written and codes are found. They assume Zealot killed the twin sister after using her. Now she's dead and labeled as an arsonist. Their father recalls a recent incident where the military supply warehouse burns down and a woman is discovered as the arsonist. The family begins planning how to avenge the twins as their father calls someone to decode the notes. They want to uncover what Zealot is plotting. Then her father declares that he is heading to the mountains to defeat the beasts. Hearing this, Beatty immediately wants to go with him. She unleashes her cuteness against her father, who cannot resist her charm. Her father, the Duke, brings her along with Carl and the other aides into the deep forest in winter. Beatty feels excited because it is her first time joining such a journey. It takes days to reach the top of the mountain, and both Carl and her father compliment her for enduring the trip. Before they even enter the forest, everyone takes care of Beatty to ensure she never feels cold during the journey. Carl informs her about the shape-shifting ritual that is about to start. It is a ritual where wild beasts searching for food during the harsh winter are prevented from approaching human homes. The ritual continues as the power of the shapeshifter spread throughout the mountains. It declares their territory and pushes the beasts deeper into the forest. Because of this, the wild creatures avoid the human houses entirely. Beatty becomes amazed when her father shapeshifts and passes by as a lion. Carl, unimpressed, boasts that his mane is much cooler than their father's. The moment her father roars, all the beasts immediately flee in fear. Oh, Carl, you just want your little sister to compliment you too. The Duke's roar feels as though he's declaring himself the true king of the mountain. Later that night, Beatty finds her father incredibly cool. She tries to shapeshift into a squirrel to avoid everyone waking up and practices roaring just like he does. The next morning, she wakes up feeling confident about her roaring. She rushes to a lake to continue practicing, hoping to imitate her father perfectly. She roars with all her might, though it sounds more like a cute little squeak. Beatty, you just sound cute. Oops. Carl notices her and bursts into laughter as he teases her. Beatty feels disappointed after all her nonstop effort and squeaking. She bites Carl without knowing exactly what he has done to upset her so badly. Carl laughs and shows their father the spot where Beatty bites him. Beatty feels devastated by his constant teasing. Their father immediately concludes that Carl is indeed at fault. She remains upset with Carl even as he tries to ask for forgiveness to get back on her good side. Her father cheers her on and asks her to show what she practiced. Beatty cannot help but feel hopeful, wanting to be as amazing as her father. Her father blushes when he realizes Beatty thinks highly of him. Well, that is not exactly what she says, but he overthinks her words anyway. His sudden fluster makes the moment strangely adorable. It's good sometimes, right? With her father's encouragement, the aides also support her despite her cuteness. They tell her that her roaring will only grow more thrilling. Encouraged by everyone, she transforms into a squirrel and lets out a squeak. Her father cheers for her, though aides remain unimpressed because she looks cuter than scary. When she squeaks a second time, power bursts from her unexpectedly. The shock on her father's and brother's faces says everything. For now, her power remains unstable until its full awakening. Once it matures, she will be able to use L in her name and join the succession battle. Even though she's a squirrel, her father encourages her warmly, making her hopeful to earn the title. Betty L. Aslan! That night, they return to the estate. Pagris congratulates Beatty on her awakening and later on reports everything about Zealot's wrongdoings. After reading the documents, they confirm Zealot's evil deeds and request that he be summoned immediately. Zealot is summoned to the Duke's study. He acts innocent, confident that the Duke has no direct evidence against him. He even tries to change the topic to Beatty, who has challenged the succession battle. He is really smart. But the Duke grants all his children the right to challenge the succession, which makes Zealot jealous. He insists that Beatty is not a lion and cannot become the head of the family. Without hesitation, Betty's father, the Duke, chokes him, leaving him hurt and gasping. Finally, they understand that Zealot's evil schemes were driven by his desire to seize the family head position. Betty stops the Duke from hurting him further. They show him the box full of papers left behind by the twins' elder sister. Zealot is shocked but decides to play it safe. No matter how much he denies it, they have decoded every document. He orchestrated the death of someone framed as an arsonist, caused the first retreat before the regression, and turned Aslan into the kingdom's laughingstock. Actions that are unforgivable. Betty calls him out for breaking his oath. The betrayal is not only in the decoded papers, but also in the lies and manipulations he carried out. Zealot is dragged away, destined to suffer until he speaks the truth. The Duke already wished Zealot dead when Betty was falsely accused, yet he remains patient, waiting for the perfect moment to punish him. He plans to continue inflicting physical punishment until Zealot finally confesses every deceit. After all, patience is a virtue. Zealot has brown hair and dull yellow eyes, even if he is blood-related to the Aslans. He was not born with the golden color of the golden lion. Because of this, he desires something he shouldn't have. His father does not treat him well, yet he remains grateful for inheriting the blood of lions. He believes that once his cousin Leonhardt vanishes, he will become the head of the family. His ambition grows as he waits for fate to give him a chance. The first opportunity comes when Leonhardt falls in love with someone who is not a beast. A beast only marries another beast because an ordinary human cannot withstand the Aslan's power within their offspring. Leonhardt marries the human anyway, but Zealot does not expect them to bear a child. The woman who marries Leonhardt comes from a family of squirrel beasts. Their union results in a new heir who is born healthy and strong, and that child is named Carl. Zealot is stunned that the child survives without issue. Years pass, but Zealot refuses to abandon his desire to become the family head. A second opportunity appears when the royal family of snakes sends him a letter. The moment he reads it, he knows he cannot decline. The offer allows him to break his oath of loyalty and seize the position he longs for. By accepting it, he sets out to devour Aslan from within. Everything goes smoothly until Beatty appears and disrupts his plans. The Duke continues to punish him because he refuses to reveal the truth. Zealot silently hopes that the Prince Ritter will come to save him. Meanwhile, Beatty understands that the royal family stands behind Zealot's betrayal. Betty plans to find strong evidence against them when she sees Carl training her squirrel. He wants to make sure someone can protect her if danger comes. Pagris suddenly passes by with the others, bringing boxes, hoping it will give them clues for the investigation. Betty examines the encrypted papers carefully until she finds a symbol she recognizes. She recalls her conversation with Prince Ritter back then and the details he once shared. The casualty flower symbol appears and is used as an emblem of the royal family, confirming her suspicions. Go, girl, get them! Betty storms into the punishment room. Everyone is shocked to see her, but Pagris can't stop her after she discovers the deciphered papers. She bursts out with the truth that Zealot falsifies her mother's letter while her father is far away. The Duke collars Zealot in fury, but Betty already knows who assists Zealot in his evil deeds and in breaking the loyalty oath. As Zealot tries to speak, he suddenly loses the ability to talk and stops breathing. Meanwhile, the Snake royal family enjoys their tea time. They are not worried about Zealot revealing the truth because they plan everything in advance. The prince secretly feeds him the poison of domination. The poison was left behind by the 3 previous kings during the times of crisis. They combine their poison and elixir abilities into a single bottle. It is then stored in a room where time is frozen to prevent it from dispersing. Zealot drinks the poison, believing it is the antidote for breaking the oath of loyalty. Instead, it turns him obedient and easily controlled. Now he stays loyal to the royal family first rather than the Aslan family, his own family. And now he's fooled by the snakes. Back in the punishment room, Zealot believes he's about to die. Fortunately, a sea umbrella worm allows humans to keep breathing before death so they can interrogate criminals for the truth. The Duke knows Zealot cannot use such magic to kill himself. Beatty informs the Duke about the secret meeting between the Queen and Zealot. With this revelation, they confirm that the royal family is responsible for Zealot nearly dying. Beatty then plans to extract answers in a different way. What stops Zealot from speaking is the snake's venom, so Beatty asks him to blink once if something is true and twice if it's false. After questioning him, they discover that the royal family is indeed behind all of the evil actions. Beatty wonders if the snakes possess other abilities. The Duke agrees, stating that the snakes have more powers than most people know. He recalls a time when a general betrayed his country and became a loyal servant of their kingdom. Everyone questions the general's sudden loyalty shift. Behind the scenes, it is believed that the king's secret powers influence him. Beatty asks Zealot another question, but they do not get the answer they hope for. They find it strange that a poison with an incubation period does not match the timeline from manipulating the letters to removing the oath. There's an ability snake shifters possess, but they cannot find the right term for it. They continue interrogating Zealot, determined to uncover the truth. Many facts are revealed as they press on. When Betty's mother travels to the capital, the letters she sends are manipulated without her knowing. Under the poison's influence, her aunt brainwashes her mother into choosing which words to write. That is how the letters are sent each time. Even her father, who is away at war, is deceived by their tricks. The Duke blames himself for being blind to the truth. None of them are at fault but the snakes. Later, Betty quietly approaches her mother's painting and stares at it. She misses every moment they spend together. The Duke comforts her, carries her to bed, and promises that they will never forgive the snakes and that justice will be served. After everything, Betty stands before her mother's portrait in silence. Her face appears blank, but her eyes shine with determination. The prince sees her in that state, and he cannot bring himself to ignore her. Justice should be served. He wants to take her sadness away as quickly as possible. Suddenly, her squirrel attacks the prince, causing Betty to notice the commotion. She scolds Snowstorm, the squirrel, and apologizes to the prince immediately. She tries to wipe the prince's shirt, marked with Snowstorm's little footprints. The prince blushes at their closeness and becomes flustered. He assures her that he will wash the shirt himself. Suddenly, Betty reaches toward his neck to wipe something off. He blushes deeply, and his horn appears the moment she touches his signum. Betty quickly apologizes for touching such a sensitive place without permission. A signum is proof that someone is a shapeshifter. He reminds Betty to ask her family about touching someone else's signum. Then, the prince leaves hurriedly when Betty innocently suggests exchanging touches of each other's signum. Later, Betty talks about one's signum. Carl reminds Betty that she must never touch anyone's signum, not even Prince Atere's. One may only touch another signum after marriage because it's a secret body part. Betty gasps at the implication of marriage and panics about accidentally touching Prince Atere's signum. She spirals into overthinking about what it might mean. Uh-oh. Meanwhile, Prince Atere worries that Betty may have recognized him. At first, Betty is only a maid until they discover she is a princess of Aslan. He hides his identity to better understand her situation. He fears she might distance herself from the first prince, Atere, because of their delicate relationship between the royals and the Aslans. So he becomes Atel, her friend, and not Atere, the first prince, for now. He overthinks, believing she will hate him if she learns everything. Betty finds Atere outside and apologizes after learning about the signum. He assures her that everything is fine while blushing at her presence. She asks him to move closer, and he complies quietly. Then she removes his blindfold and finally realizes that Atel and Atere are the same person. She always loves the way his eyes shine, which makes Atere blush even more. No one else ever looks into his eyes the way she does. Atere feels relieved that she's not angry at him. She is just relieved that the truth answers all her questions. Betty has never truly felt love or friendship since her betrayal before. When she arrives at the castle, the Duke and Carl show her unconditional care. Atere was her only friend before everything, which makes him deeply important to her. She knows he would do anything for her. Instead of being angry, Betty holds his hand and drags him along. She wants him to follow her to a secret place. Oh, he's blushing. The Duke is frustrated knowing they only have a letter as evidence against the royal family, the snakes. Pegris worries about the counterattack after Zealot's interrogation. His aides remember the royal family's treachery and view them as the main enemy. Since winter is coming and the capital is warmer than the dukedom, transporting military supplies for war will be easier. The Duke feels reassured by his aides' support after all the humiliation they have suffered. Plans begin quietly but firmly within the walls of the dukedom. A servant informs the Duke that the family is having tea. Hearing this, he beams with happiness and leaves the meeting early. His joy is clear as he hurries toward the gathering. He is such a good father! But during tea time, the Duke grows furious. He does not like an outsider like Atere being present, and even Carl is annoyed. Beatty insists that she invited him, refusing to back down. The Duke and Carl wonder what she intends to say to gather the whole family. They're ready to draw their swords if the topic turns to marriage. When Beatty speaks about the snakes instead, they breathe a quiet sigh of relief. They begin planning how to handle the situation. There may be 2 princesses and 2 princes, with the king orchestrating things behind the scenes. The power of the dukedom is growing stronger, and the royals fear losing their authority. The Duke decides that the only solution is war. Beatty worries that a civil war could worsen the food situation and bring famine during winter. She opposes war and explains herself, hating to see her family hurt and blamed for treason. The Duke and Carl hug her to comfort her. He apologizes for not considering her fears. To punish the royal family, Beatty insists they take Prince Atere with them, knowing they will need his help. The royal family wants Atere because they crave the throne. Ritter appears relaxed, as if he owns everything, but when it comes to his stepbrother Atere, he grows tense. That tension is impossible to hide. That is the day when news of Atere's battlefield exploits spreads throughout the kingdom. Beatty remembers how Ritter becomes annoyed learning that Atere has won battles. His hatred is clear, fueled by his desire for the throne. While the royal figures hide behind, Atere stands bravely on the front lines, defending the kingdom. He proves that he deserves the throne more than Ritter ever could. Everyone sees the truth, though they plan to support Atere carefully, knowing the royal family will resist. The Duke thinks proudly of his baby's cleverness, but cannot help the irritation he feels towards Atere. Atere voices his support for the suggestion to give justice to Betty's family, even though he has no personal interest in the throne. Beatty senses the sadness in his heart, despite his gentle smile. She understands that feeling, and she cannot forgive the snakes who have hurt Atere. She holds his hand firmly, reminding him that he is not alone. Memories flash back of how he died in the past. Before the regression, years later, Atere is celebrated as a war hero. Then the shocking news comes. He has suddenly died at the hands of an imperial assassin. At the time, Beatty did not know the truth about Atere or Ritter. Now she realizes Atere did not die from an assassin's blade, but at the hands of his own family, punished for opposing the throne's succession. In this life, Beatty vows to protect him, ensuring his death never occurs. Carl grows annoyed seeing his sister holding Atere's hand. He warns them to stay distant to avoid suspicion, but Beatty refuses. Carl commanded Snowstorm and attacked Atere. She stops them, declaring that Atere is her old friend, the only friend she has ever truly trusted. Anyone who hurts him will not be forgiven. Carl frowns as he watches Atere smile at Betty's unwavering loyalty. He's just an overprotective brother, Beatty. They continue planning strategically, convincing other nobles to side with them. Beatty unveils the first-class vermouth potion, ready to use the nobles' desires to their advantage, hoping they will succeed. Beatty has learned a key lesson. To conquer the business world, you must sell a lot or sell at luxury price. She chooses the latter. With a first-grade wormut potion, she plans to have the nobility eat from her palm. What a brilliant business strategy! Knowing nobles seek exclusive products, Beatty launches an ultra-exclusive boutique, the Golden Rare. It isn't just about money, the real goal is influence. The mission is to sway nobles to side with their rightful heir, Prince Atere. They will use a complimentary canteen and curated gossip, spreading information without getting their hands dirty. True to her plan, the Golden Rare becomes the nobles' new jewel. They flock to buy grade-A products and, more importantly, to gossip. The chatter naturally turns to slandering the royal family's extravagance. Respect and revenue, all in one. Though not directly involved, Pegasus observes and perhaps joins the whispers. Several nobles are disillusioned, criticizing the king's misuse of the treasury. Later, Pegasus attends the royal banquet, scrutinizing the lackluster preparations. He also waits for the Duke's special present to arrive. What present? Oh, just a dramatic explosion at the palace, no biggie. It's merely an eye for an eye. Since the king burnt down Leonhardt's warehouse, the Duke returns the favor with twice the spectacle. The king reacts with rage, not for his people, but because the explosion damaged the wing hiding his secret poisons. He certainly has his twisted priorities straight, shoving his own wife aside. He then orders a search of innocent citizens, accusing them of treason. It's the perfect move to further destroy his own crumbling reputation. Pegasus returns from the capital, astonished by the banquet's outcome. The royal family's reputation was publicly dismantled before the nobility. Only a handful of loyalists attended, their faith now uncertain. The true masterstroke was the king's own reaction. His decision to interrogate innocent guests was the final nail. Those few followers swiftly became furious critics. It unfolded exactly as Beatty masterfully orchestrated. Don't you just adore a slow, satisfying revenge? For every negative, there's a positive. Beatty reaps a double harvest of fortune. First, the golden rare has exploded in popularity, becoming the must-have luxury for nobles across every faction. Second, their meticulous preparations for the impending dire winter are progressing without a hitch. Stores are full, plans are set, and the duchy will be a bastion of warmth and safety. Take that, world hunger! Our brilliant squirrel is solving everything from left to right. She deserves endless compliments and the finest cookies. Concluding their review, the Duke turns to a delicate matter. His expression softens as he outlines a plan for her to spend winter in a milder climate for her health. Beatty protests. She's no longer frail, and her heart belongs in the north. But her father's resolve is firm. He recounts her infancy, the fragile baby who struggled to breathe in the cold. Faced with the love and fear in his eyes, Betty's defiance softens. Perhaps, for her father who once feared losing her, she can be persuaded. As a baby, Beatty was the center of her parents' protective world, especially her father Leon's. They worried constantly over her health, as she slept far more than any energetic infant should, a sign of her inherently frail constitution. She never did the usual things most Aslan family members were known for, like crying with formidable volume, shredding furniture, or demonstrating a precocious interest in hunting. Is that what passes for normal here? Isn't that kind of monstrous for a child? Furthermore, she never once produced the mighty lion's cry of her lineage. Then again, she isn't a lion, so that part at least makes perfect sense. The family's only response was to cherish and shield their delicate baby. That is, until her first winter arrived. She fell gravely ill with a mysterious sickness no physician could diagnose or cure. Their only desperate solution was to send both Stasha and Beatty to the warmer capital. But wait, isn't that just a strange coincidence? Don't regular squirrels hibernate through the cold months? That would be a simple explanation if she weren't a rare squirrel shifter. All shapeshifters acquire dominant traits from their animal spirit. Leon's greatest struggle has been the lack of resources or knowledge to understand her unique abilities. His only recourse has been to protect her in the way he knows best: complete isolation from winter's touch. Later that night, Beatty racks her brain for a solution. She tries to think of a suitable vacation spot within the Northern Territories, but to no avail. Winter is inescapable there. To make matters worse, her companion Snowstorm is no help, having grown decidedly chubbier than the average squirrel. How on earth is she going to change her stubborn father's mind? Perhaps demonstrating her full mastered powers could work. It's worth a try to prove she's truly healthy and capable now. As she focuses, a sudden thunderous surge of energy erupts from within her, and a deeply familiar warmth floods her senses. The constellation. It has finally chosen to grace them with its presence, its celestial light shimmering to life within Snowstorm's now glowing form. Maybe, at long last, it can unveil the secrets of Betty's unique squirrel ancestry. Despite its late arrival, the constellation is here now, and Beatty doesn't waste a second. She fires off all her burning questions immediately. First, the winter illness. The constellation confirms it's simply the work of nature. The hibernation theory is correct. Told you so. Next, the shapeshifter traits. It explains that the dominant strength rule applies mainly to beast-type shifters. Squirrel shifters are a more intellectual breed. That's quite a slander for a small being, but then again, Betty, you're perfect just the way you are. But what about manifesting a lion's power? The answer is clear. Her shapeshifter abilities haven't fully matured yet. With a gentle celestial peck, the constellation bestows a surge of its own energy upon her. Betty focuses and tries again. This time, a tremendous wave of power thunders from within her, roaring through her room and echoing across the vast sky. It's a release of pure might, focus, and stored energy. She may be a squirrel, but she is special. Her innate power is the ability to store, to absorb and transform other energies into her own. This means that now, having integrated the lion's essence, she can survive winter without needing to hibernate. Hooray! To use this power, she can store energy passively as before, or she can initiate a more direct transfer. The next day, she comes sprinting into her father's study where he's meeting with Pegasus and Carl. Without warning, she ambushes Leon with a big dramatic kiss. This sends Carl into a fit of brotherly envy and makes Leon gush over how adorable she is, until it devolves into a full-blown affectionate competition between the men. However, that was no ordinary kiss. It was Beatty actively using her shapeshifter ability to directly store their unique powers for herself. The ability to store powers? More like the ability to store cuteness given the reaction she just caused. The men don't think much of her playful ambush until Beatty proudly demonstrates her newfound control, a significant leap from her first clumsy awakening. She can't explain that she met the actual squirrel constellation, but fortunately, the Duke provides a convenient theory. He suggests her growth is due to the constellation's bright appearance last night and her natural development. He remains wonderfully, conveniently oblivious. If her power activates through contact, he declares she should absorb even more from them. Oh boy, poor Beatty is about to be trampled by a tidal wave of familial affection. Later, while venturing out to explore her abilities, she recalls the storage methods. Sticking close to someone grants indirect energy, and direct touch is stronger. But a kiss is the most potent method, allowing for deep, rapid absorption. The most effective way? A true mouth-to-mouth kiss, and obviously not from a family member. Is our baby going to get her first kiss? At this age? Who does she have in mind? Oh, of course we know the answer. It's Atere, her dear friend Atel. She bravely asks him for a significant favor, to which he agrees immediately. The boy is willing to give her whatever she finds fit. Reluctance immediately eats at her, as she knows from her books that what she's asking for is meant for lovers. Nevertheless, she takes the bullet and asks. Flabbergasted, Atel doesn't refuse, despite currently being firmly in the friend zone. Her bigger worry, however, is that the act might somehow kill him. Now, Bee, I think he'd die happily from the shock alone. Where did you get that nasty idea? Apparently, the Duke once told her a man could die if he kisses a woman before wedlock. What a sly, overprotective lion. Atel feels a familiar frustration at being reminded they are merely just friends. He gently warns her that a kiss on the lips is strictly forbidden before both a wedding and her coming-of-age ceremony. On his way to pester his little sister, Carl is giddy at the thought of Beatty storing his powers. That is, until a sharp brotherly instinct makes him pause. It's not danger, but a deep, uneasy feeling that trouble is nearby. He follows the feeling and finds the source, a certain prince with raven hair. Interrogating the first prince on why he smells unnaturally happy, Atel hastily reassures him it's nothing, and definitely not because of Beatty. Carl gives him a long, suspicious stare before finally running off. The moment he's alone, Atel relaxes. No, he blushes fiercely, his semi-dragon horns growing and scaly tail coming out shimmering as he remembers what happened just moments before. What happens? Let's rewind! Atel feels guilty for his white lie about the coming-of-age rule, but he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else kissing the innocent Beatty. Our baby is quite too oblivious to the matters of the heart. Before parting, he not so boldly asks if she needs the dragon's power too. Our Beatty? She goes for the kill. Instead of a hug, she presses a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. For her, it was just efficient power storage. For Atel, it is a world-shifting event that made him excuse himself in a blushing, stammering mess, his mind replaying the feel of her lips on his skin. Oh, finally! The Batel community is rising! Meanwhile, deep in the royal palace, a furious king stares out his window. He is consumed with one question. Who dared blow up his palace? The recent banquet yielded no useful information, only complaints. His sole priority is recovering his centuries-old secret poisons. He doesn't care about the people or his wife's concerns. Everything is a mockery to him, from nearly losing the poison to the wormut potion debacle. Suddenly, an eagle arrives bearing a message. It is an envoy from the Pope himself, announcing the arrival of a new emissary. A new, undoubtedly hot character has entered the scene. Just what is his connection to the king? Hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more of him. Wink wink. Major plot twist. The envoy isn't here to deliver old news, but a direct answer to the king's earlier inquiry. This only fuels Nader's rage, making him feel cornered and pressured. How are you even feeling pressured, bro? The Pope has been waiting with saintly patience for a response, but Nader has been dilly-dallying for weeks. The polished messenger states he will return soon and promises to be more vigilant on the Pope's behalf next time. Nader is, of course, a huge hater. He fumes, but knows he must tolerate this interference until he can somehow seize the Pope's legendary powers for himself. But why? What is his true terrifying endgame? Meanwhile, at the highest snowy mountain peak, Beatty performs a thorough self-check. The result is perfect and undeniable. She is 100% A-OK. They came here for one crucial reason, to test her health in the most extreme cold. If it weren't for Leon being such a magnificent worrywart, he insisted on seeing her resilience with his own eyes before changing his winter plans. Her efforts are not in vain. After a full week on the frigid mountain, actively using her shapeshifter powers to regulate her body, she has proven her strength. They will return home soon, but not before offering their gratitude. They pray to the squirrel constellation, which glows brilliantly in the clear night sky. For Betty's curious mind, this is another golden opportunity. The moon bathes the peak in silver light as Betty prepares a special preservation crystal. It awaits the direct starlight from her constellation. Its purpose is to reveal fragmented memories, the why behind the constellation sending her back in time after her death. It shows a foretelling of a specific, catastrophic future it is desperate to avoid. A blinding beam of starlight ignites the crystal, and Betty is pulled into a vision of the past. She witnesses the aftermath of her own death, a world plunged into total disaster, brimming with eternal storm and consuming fire. That apocalyptic vision is the future that unfolds after her death. The world descends into pure, unending chaos. The renowned peace people cherish withers into ash, leaving behind a literal hell for everyone. And is that a familiar streak of golden thunder in the storm? Could that belong to... Back in the present, Betty is overwhelmed. How can she prevent such a cataclysm? Her powers are growing, but they aren't world-changing yet. The fading constellation offers its last reassurance. She's the only one who can stop it, and for now, simply existing is enough. But that just raises more questions it can't answer. It leaves the memory crystal with her, charging her to solve the puzzle of why she's the key. Did the world really end just because she died too soon? All these whys hurt my head. Fortunately, the story moves on as the family returns home, just as the first snowflake falls. Witnessing her joyful wonder, Carl challenges her to a snowball fight to test her abilities. Oh, you have no idea what's coming, Carl. Betty shifts into her squirrel form, using her small size and quick paws to outmaneuver him completely, pelting him with a rapid barrage of snowballs. Superior strategy wins every time. Watching them, Leon looks on with deep fondness, proud of the resilient daughter who will one day lead the duchy. Later, basking in her victory with warm cookies, Betty decides to share some with Attell. She heads to his room but pauses at the door. From inside, she overhears the sounds of urgent preparation. It seems he's packing to leave and set out to sea much sooner than she thought. Eventually, Attell and Betty discuss his sudden looming departure. The sole reason is his shameless father, the king, who has ordered him to deal with pirates along the coastline. But you're still practically a child. Why does he keep throwing you into every conflict? Attell can only offer Betty a soft reassurance and a promise to return as soon as possible. But is that a promise he can truly keep? That night, worries plague her restless mind. As she tosses and turns, the memory crystal on her bedside begins to glow, pulling her consciousness into the past. She relives a specific memory, meeting Attell in his dragon form in the capital, back when she mistakenly believed he was Leader. It was the kind of deception Leader would use to manipulate her. But in the memory, Attell never denies the mistaken identity. If he thought it was better that way, why did he look so profoundly lonely? The trip down memory lane ends as the real Attell gently nudges her, pulling her from her dazed state. Seeing her so troubled, Betty asks him a hypothetical question. Why would he ever let someone like Leader claim his identity? The concept confuses the prince. He can't imagine doing so unless under very specific painful circumstances. Perhaps if it meant Leader could be the friend she needed, someone always present unlike him who is constantly dragged to battlefields and could simply disappear one day. He stops mid-explanation, his own insecure reasoning halting as he sees the devastating effects of his words. Silent tears are now streaming down Betty's cheeks. Betty admits her tears come from him casually implying he might die, a fate she knows came true in her past life. He died a hero on a battlefield, a stranger she once formerly mourned. Now, everything is different. This time, she is determined he will live. But what use is her power if it cannot protect him when he's deployed? She looks at him with stern resolve, correcting a final misunderstanding. The world could offer her 1,000 copies of Leader, but she would choose only a tell. Just him and him alone, and she will wait for him to return. Such a bold profession from Our Lady! And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the moment Attell realizes his feelings for her run far deeper than he ever admits. Time flies and the day of departure arrives. It is a moment of tears and sadness for Betty, save for some people. She only wishes to see him again in spring, but fears his return may take much longer. Before riding away, silently weak to her tears, Attell offers Carl a vague, apologetic bow without explanation. Carl, you'd actually kill him if you knew the real reason. Carl considers making sure the prince never returns, but is immediately threatened by his baby sister with the ultimate punishment. She would never speak to him again. Leon sees this as a perfect opportunity to comfort his daughter, though his words carry a hidden, calculating agenda of his own. Well, let's just hope Attell returns safely and their precious bond remains unbroken. A month passes quickly. True to his word, Attell sends regular letters. Betty cherishes them, but for now, they must wait. She has an important class to attend. It is a special class to prepare her as a future successor of the Aslan household. While Carl remains the official heir, Betty simply loves to learn new things, as expected of our resident smarty pants. However, her intense dedication to her studies begins to worry her tutor, Johanna. She reports to the Duke, praising Betty's diligence, which surpasses even his and Carl's at her age. In short, she is the perfect pupil. Despite the gentle slander, Leon simply glows with pride over his daughter's brilliance. Brilliant enough to deserve a statue. Pegasus also arrives with his report. The Great Winter has caused significant damage across the continent, but the Aslan lands are a thriving exception. Their civilians are warm, well-fed, and secure, all thanks to Betty's foresight and preparations. That achievement definitely calls for another statue. A more pressing matter is also discussed, Betty's upcoming birthday. Her past birthdays were marked by loneliness and sadness, often overshadowed by her despicable aunt claiming her gifts. This year, that will not happen. They are determined to make it grand. But who cares about the budget? The only goal is to see her smile shine. Time flies and the day arrives. Hundreds of guests fill the estate, all gathered to celebrate their talented squirrel. The party is in full swing when something odd happens. But hold on, why is a crowd suddenly gathering around Pegasus? And what is that? We'll stop here for today, guys. Yes, I know you want more. Don't forget to ask for the next part in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching and for your support. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Till the next one.